They married her to a cripple to destroy her. What they didn't know? He wasn't a beggar at all, and she wasn't planning to stay silent. This is the story of Eliza Harrow, a woman the world tried to erase, and the dangerous man who became her unlikely weapon. If you want to see how a trapped woman turns humiliation into absolute power, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far Eliza's story can reach. The chapel smelled like dust and old candle wax. Eliza Harrow stood in the aisle wearing a dress 2 sizes too large, borrowed from someone's closet and reeking faintly of moth repellent. The lace scratched against her collarbone. The hem dragged on the stone floor. It was a wedding dress in name only, a costume meant to make her look pitiful. And it worked. The room was nearly empty. A handful of guests sat scattered across the pews like they'd been paid to witness something distasteful and wanted to keep their distance. Her stepmother, Victoria, sat in the front row with her hands folded primly in her lap, her mouth a thin line of satisfaction. Next to her sat Eliza's father, Edward Harrow, staring at his shoes like a man who'd sold his soul and couldn't bear to watch the transaction finalized. Eliza didn't look at him. She couldn't, not without screaming. At the altar stood the groom, Caleb Vane, or at least that's what they called him. Eliza had never heard the name before 3 days ago, when Victoria announced the engagement like she was ordering new drapes. "You'll marry him on Saturday," she'd said, voice clipped and final. "It's already arranged." Eliza had asked who he was. Victoria's smile had been thin and cold. A beggar, a cripple, perfect for a girl with no prospects. Now, standing 10 feet away from him, Eliza studied the man she was about to be legally bound to for the rest of her life. He leaned heavily on a wooden crutch, his left leg stiff and angled awkwardly beneath him. His clothes were clean but worn, a jacket with frayed cuffs, trousers that had seen better years. His hair was dark and unkempt, his face half hidden by the shadow of the dim chapel light. He didn't look at her, didn't smile, didn't do anything. He just stood there, waiting. The officiant cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today." Eliza's mind drifted. She'd heard this speech before. At her mother's funeral, actually, though that had been a different priest in a different lifetime. Back when her father still had a spine. Back when the Harrow name still meant something. Now, it meant nothing, less than nothing. Her mother had been dead for 6 years. Her father had remarried within 2. Victoria Harrow, née Caldwell, was beautiful, calculating, and utterly ruthless. She'd entered the house like a storm and reorganized everything in her image. Within a year, Eliza's tutors were dismissed. Her allowance was cut. Her friends stopped visiting. "You don't need an education," Victoria had said once, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You need to learn how to manage a household, how to be useful." Useful. That word had haunted Eliza for years. She wasn't useful, apparently. She was too stubborn, too proud, too much her mother's daughter. And now she was being erased. "Do you, Caleb Vane, take this woman?" Eliza's gaze snapped back to the altar. The man, Caleb, was looking at the priest, his expression unreadable. Up close, she noticed things she hadn't before. His jaw was sharp. His hands, gripping the crutch, were large and calloused. His posture, despite the crutch, was strangely rigid, almost military. He didn't look like a beggar. He looked like someone pretending to be one. "I do," he said. His voice was low, rough, but steady. The officiant turned to Eliza. "And do you, Eliza Harrow, take this man?" She hesitated. Not because she was afraid, not because she was sad, but because she was thinking. Victoria had orchestrated this. That much was obvious. But why this man? Why now? The Harrow estate was already under Victoria's control. Edward had signed everything over to her years ago, too drunk and guilt-ridden to care. Eliza had no money, no inheritance, no power. Marrying her off to some random cripple didn't gain Victoria anything. Unless it wasn't about gain, unless it was about removal. Eliza's chest tightened. Victoria wanted her gone, not just out of the house, out of the city, out of society. Married to a man with no name, no family, no future. A man no one would ever look for. A man no one would miss. "Miss Harrow." The priest was staring at her. Eliza met his eyes. Then she looked past him, to the arched window behind the altar. Rain streaked the glass. The sky outside was gray and heavy. She could say no. She could turn around, walk out, and let the whole thing collapse. But then what? She had no money, no allies. Her father wouldn't help her. He'd made that abundantly clear. And Victoria would just find another way. Another trap. Another humiliation. At least here, she'd have a name, a legal standing, a husband who, for whatever reason, looked far more capable than he was supposed to. Eliza straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin. I do. The words tasted like iron. The priest smiled thinly. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. No one clapped. Caleb turned to her. For the first time, their eyes met directly. His were dark, sharp, calculating, not the eyes of a beggar. We should go, he said quietly. Eliza frowned. Go where? Home. I don't. Your things are already packed, Victoria interrupted, rising from her seat. She crossed the aisle with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. The carriage is outside. You'll leave immediately. Eliza's blood went cold. Leave? Where? To your husband's estate, of course. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. You're a married woman now, Eliza. Your place is with him. Estate? Eliza repeated. She glanced at Caleb. You said you were a... I said nothing, Caleb replied evenly. He shifted his weight on the crutch. Your stepmother made assumptions. Victoria's expression didn't change, but Eliza saw the flicker of something behind her eyes. Surprise. Or maybe irritation. The carriage, Victoria repeated. Now. Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers. But Caleb was already moving toward the door, his crutch tapping against the stone floor in a steady, unhurried rhythm. She had no choice but to follow. Outside, the October wind bit through the thin fabric of her borrowed dress. Eliza shivered, wrapping her arms around herself as she descended the chapel steps. The street was empty except for the carriage and a few passers-by who glanced at them with mild curiosity before moving on. No one cared. No one would remember this. That was the point. The carriage was black and unmarked, pulled by two gray horses that looked better fed than most of the people Eliza had seen on the streets that morning. A driver sat at the front, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't look at her. Caleb climbed in first, surprisingly agile despite the crutch. Eliza hesitated at the step. Miss Harrow, the driver said, his voice low and respectful. If you please. She climbed in. The interior was plain but clean. The seats were upholstered in dark leather, the windows covered with heavy curtains. Caleb sat across from her, the crutch resting beside him. He was already looking out the window, his expression distant. The door closed. The carriage lurched forward. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Eliza studied him in the dim light filtering through gaps in the curtains. Now that they were alone, away from the chapel, and Victoria's watchful eyes, she could see him more clearly. His clothes were worn, yes, but they fit him well. Too well for hand-me-downs. And his hands, those calloused, capable hands, they weren't the hands of someone who'd spent his life begging on street corners. Who are you? She asked finally. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He pulled back one of the curtains slightly and glanced outside, watching the city streets roll past. Someone who needed a wife, he said finally. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Eliza's jaw tightened. I don't even know where we're going. North. That's also not an answer. Caleb let the curtain fall and leaned back in his seat. His gaze settled on her, calm and assessing, like he was trying to figure something out. You could have said no, he pointed out. Could I? Yes. And then what? Go back to my stepmother? Let her lock me in a room until she finds another way to get rid of me? Eliza's voice was sharp, edged with bitterness she'd been holding back for years. You think I had a choice? Everyone has a choice. Easy for you to say. Caleb's expression didn't change. You think this is easy for me? I think, Eliza said slowly, choosing her words carefully, that you're not what you pretend to be. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed slightly. Careful. Why? You going to throw me out of a moving carriage? No. His voice was flat. But you should learn when to keep your mouth shut. Eliza laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised even her. I've spent 6 years keeping my mouth shut. It didn't save me. Caleb watched her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. The movement was deliberate, controlled. You want to know who I am? He asked quietly. Yes. Then wait. You'll see soon enough. That's not... Wait, he repeated. His tone left no room for argument. Eliza clenched her fists in her lap. She hated this. Hated the lack of control, the uncertainty, the way he spoke to her like she was a child being told to sit still and behave. But she also hated the fact that he was right. She didn't have a choice. Not really. Not yet. So she sat back, crossed her arms, and waited. The city gave way to countryside. Rolling hills stretched out in every direction, bare trees stark against the gray sky. The rain kept falling, turning the dirt roads to thick mud that sucked at the carriage wheels. They passed through small villages, clusters of cottages with smoke rising from chimneys, children playing in puddles, farmers leading livestock through narrow streets. Eliza watched it all through the gap in the curtains. She'd never been this far from the city before. Her entire life had been contained within a few square miles. The Harrow townhouse, the market district, the parks where proper young ladies were allowed to walk under supervision. Now she was being taken somewhere unknown, by a man who wouldn't tell her his real name for reasons she couldn't begin to guess. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt strangely calm. Or maybe numb. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. Were you part of it? She asked suddenly. Caleb looked up. Part of what? Victoria's plan. To get rid of me. He considered the question. No. Then why marry me? I told you, I needed a wife. Why? That's my business. Eliza's frustration flared. I'm your wife now. Doesn't that make it my business too? Not yet. When? When I decide you can be trusted. The words hit like a slap. Eliza stared at him, anger rising hot in her chest. Trusted? You don't even know me. Exactly. So what am I supposed to do? Just sit quietly and wait for you to decide I'm worthy of basic information about my own life? Caleb's expression remained neutral. If you're smart, yes. And if I'm not? Then you'll make things difficult for both of us. Eliza wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, but she forced herself to stay still, to breathe, to think. He was testing her. She could see it now. Every word, every deliberate non-answer, it was all designed to see how she'd react, to see if she'd break down, lash out, prove herself to be exactly what everyone expected. A spoiled, helpless girl who couldn't handle reality. Well, she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Fine, she said coolly. I'll wait. Caleb's eyebrow lifted slightly. Just like that. Just like that. You're not going to argue? Would it change anything? No. Then why waste my breath? For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. It was gone in an instant, but Eliza caught it. Smart girl, he murmured. Woman, Eliza corrected. I'm 19, not a girl. My mistake. They fell back into silence. But it felt different now, less hostile, more like a stalemate. Eliza turned back to the window and watched the countryside roll past. Her mind was already working, cataloging details, filing away information for later. He'd said north. That ruled out the southern counties. The carriage was well maintained and the horses were strong, which meant money. Real money, not the scraps her family had been living on. The driver had called her Miss Harrow with genuine respect, not the mocking deference servants used when they knew their mistress had no real power. And Caleb, or whatever his real name was, he moved like a soldier. She'd seen enough veterans in the city to recognize the bearing, the discipline, the way he held himself even when he was supposedly crippled. None of it added up to Beggar. So what was he? The hours dragged on. The rain turned to drizzle, then stopped altogether. The clouds broke apart, revealing patches of pale sky. Eliza counted the mile markers when they passed through larger towns. After the third one, she started recognizing the names from the geography books she'd read in secret after Victoria dismissed her tutors. They were heading toward the northern provinces. the mountainous regions where the old nobility still held sway, far from the city's politics and gossip. Interesting. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust, the carriage slowed. Eliza sat up straighter. "We're here," Caleb said. The carriage turned off the main road onto a private drive. Trees lined both sides, their bare branches forming a canopy overhead. The drive was long, longer than any Eliza had seen before. It curved and wound through carefully maintained grounds, past manicured hedges and ornamental gardens that even in October looked pristine. Then the house came into view. No, not a house. A mansion. Eliza's breath caught. It was enormous. 3 stories of pale stone, with tall windows that glowed with warm light from within. Wings extended on either side of the main building, creating a U shape that embraced a sprawling courtyard. Ivy climbed the walls in controlled patterns. Statues flanked the entrance, lions, rampant and proud. This wasn't the home of a beggar. This was the seat of power. The carriage came to a stop in front of the main entrance. The driver climbed down and opened the door. "My lord," he said, bowing slightly. "My lord." Eliza's head snapped toward Caleb. He was already climbing out, moving with that same controlled grace. The crutch was in his hand, but he wasn't putting much weight on it. Eliza followed, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. She stepped down onto cobblestones that had been recently washed, gleaming faintly in the fading light. Servants were emerging from the house. A lot of them. They formed 2 neat lines flanking the entrance, all dressed in crisp black and white uniforms, all standing at attention, waiting. A tall man in formal livery stepped forward. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of posture that came from decades of service. "Welcome home, my lord," he said, bowing deeply. Eliza felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "My lord." Again. She turned slowly to look at Caleb. He was handing the crutch to one of the servants, just handing it over like he didn't need it anymore. Then he straightened, fully straightened. No limp, no awkwardness. No sign of injury at all. He stood at his full height, easily 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. Eliza's mind went blank. He turned to face her, and in the golden light of the setting sun, she saw him clearly for the first time. Sharp features, strong jaw, dark hair that was actually well cut, just styled to look unkempt, and those eyes, intelligent, calculating, missing nothing. This was not Caleb Vane. This was someone else entirely. "My name," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily in the still evening air, "is Rowan Blackthorne, Duke of Ashenmore." The world tilted. Duke. Duke of Ashenmore. Eliza knew that name. Everyone knew that name. The Blackthorns were one of the oldest families in the country, their wealth and influence stretching back centuries. They controlled the entire Northern Territory, commanded private armies, had the ear of the king himself. And she'd just married one of them. "Welcome to your new home," Rowan said. Eliza couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind was racing, trying to catch up, trying to make sense of what was happening. Victoria had sold her to a beggar. That's what she'd said. That's what everyone believed. But Victoria had been lied to. Or had she? Eliza's thoughts spun. Had Victoria known? Had this been part of some larger scheme? Or had she genuinely thought she was marrying Eliza off to a nobody, only to accidentally hand her stepdaughter to one of the most powerful men in the country? The irony was almost funny. Almost. "You're not real," Eliza heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant. "Caleb Vane isn't real." "No," Rowan agreed. "He's not." "Why?" "Come inside. We'll talk." He turned and walked toward the entrance. The servants parted for him, bowing as he passed. Eliza stood frozen in the courtyard. The older servant, the one who'd greeted them, approached her carefully. "My lady," he said gently, "if you'll permit me to show you inside. You must be exhausted from the journey." My lady. She was a duchess now. The realization hit her like cold water. She'd gone from being nobody, less than nobody, to being a duchess in the span of 6 hours. Eliza's voice faltered. "I don't understand." Few do, at first, the servant said kindly. But you'll learn. Come, let's get you warm. He offered his arm. Eliza took it automatically, letting him guide her up the steps and through the massive oak doors. Inside was even more overwhelming. The entrance hall was cavernous. Polished marble floors reflected the light from 3 enormous chandeliers. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor, its banister carved from dark wood and inlaid with gold. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of stern-faced men and elegant women, all watching her with painted eyes. Servants moved efficiently through the space, some carrying luggage that must have been sent ahead, others lighting candles in wall sconces as the daylight faded. "Your rooms are prepared, my lady," the older servant was saying. "We've drawn a bath and laid out fresh clothes. Dinner will be served in an hour, unless you'd prefer to dine in your chambers tonight." Eliza barely heard him. She was staring at everything, trying to process it all. This was where she lived now, this palace, this fortress, with a man who'd lied about everything. "My lady?" She focused on the servant. He was watching her with patient concern. "I'm sorry," she said. "What did you say? Would you like to dine in your chambers or join his lordship in the dining room?" Eliza's first instinct was to hide, to lock herself in whatever room they gave her and not come out until she'd figured out what the hell was going on. But that instinct, that desire to retreat and hide, it was exactly what Victoria had trained into her. 6 years of being told to be quiet, to be invisible, to not make trouble. And look where it had gotten her. Married to a stranger. Trapped in a new prison, just with nicer furniture. No. No more hiding. Eliza lifted her chin. "I'll join him for dinner." The servant's eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Very good, my lady. I'll inform the kitchen. Your rooms are this way." He led her up the grand staircase and down a long corridor lined with more portraits and ancient-looking tapestries. Finally, he stopped at a set of double doors and pushed them open. "The Duchess's chambers," he announced. Eliza stepped inside and stopped. The room was enormous. A 4-poster bed dominated one side draped in deep blue silk. A fireplace crackled with fresh logs, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Tall windows looked out over the grounds, and she could see gardens stretching into the distance. A door on the far side stood ajar, revealing what looked like a private bathing room with an actual porcelain tub. "We took the liberty of unpacking your belongings," the servant said, "though I'm afraid there wasn't much. We'll have the dressmaker come first thing in the morning to outfit you properly." Eliza turned slowly, taking it all in. "What's your name?" The servant blinked. "Hastings, my lady. I'm the house steward." "Thank you, Hastings." "Of course, my lady. Is there anything else you require?" Yes, Eliza thought. Answers, explanations, some sense of what the hell I've walked into. "No," she said aloud. "Thank you." Hastings bowed and withdrew, closing the doors quietly behind him. Eliza was alone. She walked to the window and pressed her palm against the cold glass. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky. The grounds were vast. She could see the outline of stables, what might have been a greenhouse, paths winding through formal gardens. This was her home now. She was Eliza Blackthorne, Duchess of Ashenmore, and she had absolutely no idea what that meant. The bath was hot and scented with something floral that Eliza didn't recognize. She sank into it and let the heat work into her tired muscles, washing away the grime of travel and the stale smell of the chapel. When she emerged, wrapped in a thick robe that was far too expensive for someone who'd been wearing moth-eaten lace that morning, she found clothes laid out on the bed. Not a ball gown, not some elaborate costume, just a simple dress in deep green wool, well-made and practical. It fit perfectly. Someone had measured her, probably while she was still in the city, before the wedding. This had all been planned, every detail. Eliza looked at herself in the mirror. Her dark hair was still damp, curling slightly at the ends. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but she looked different, older maybe, or just more alert, like she was seeing herself clearly for the first time in years. A clock somewhere chimed the hour, time for dinner. Eliza took a deep breath, smoothed down the skirt of her dress, and opened the door. A maid was waiting in the corridor. She curtsied quickly. "This way, my lady." The dining room was on the first floor, down another corridor that Eliza tried to memorize. The house was a maze. She'd need to learn it if she was going to survive here. The maid opened a door and stood aside. Eliza walked in. The dining room was smaller than she'd expected, intimate even. A long table dominated the space, but only 2 places had been set, one at each end. Candles flickered in silver holders. A fire burned in the hearth. Rowan was already there, standing by the window with a glass of wine in his hand. He'd changed too, into proper evening clothes that fit him like they'd been tailored specifically for his frame, which they probably had been. He turned when she entered. "You came," he said. He sounded almost surprised.
You thought I wouldn't? Most would have hidden. I'm not most. No. He studied her for a moment. I'm beginning to see that. A servant pulled out her chair. Eliza sat, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, the day before. Time had blurred. Food appeared: soup, bread, roasted meat, vegetables she couldn't name. It was more food than she'd seen in months. She forced herself to eat slowly, to not shovel it down like a starving animal, even though that's exactly what she felt like. Rowan sat at the other end of the table, eating with the casual efficiency of someone who'd never worried about where his next meal would come from. They ate in silence for several minutes. Finally, Eliza set down her spoon. "Why me?" she asked. Rowan looked up. "What? Why marry me specifically? If you needed a wife, you could have had anyone, someone with money, connections, a title. Why choose a nobody from a failing house?" He took a sip of wine, considering his answer. "Because you were available," he said finally, "and because no one would question it. That's not a reason. It's the truth. It's not the whole truth." Rowan's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "You're right. It's not. So tell me, why should I?" "Because I'm your wife. Because I'm here, in your house, with no way to leave and no idea what you want from me. Because I deserve to know what I've been dragged into." Rowan set down his glass, leaned back in his chair. "Fair enough," he said. And then, finally, he started talking. 3 months ago, I received information about corruption within my own territory. Officials skimming funds, merchants bribing inspectors, a network of fraud that ran deeper than anyone realized. I needed to investigate without alerting the guilty parties. So I disappeared. Eliza listened, her food forgotten. I took on the identity of Caleb Vane, a crippled beggar with no connections, no history, someone who could move through the city without drawing attention. And it worked. I found evidence, names, connections, enough to bring down half the corrupt officials in the northern provinces. But to maintain the disguise, I needed to be plausible. A beggar wouldn't just vanish back into nobility. He'd need a reason to leave the city. A wife seemed like the obvious answer. "So you just picked me?" "Not exactly. Your stepmother was looking for someone to take you off her hands. The timing was convenient." Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. "Convenient. I didn't mean—" "No, I understand perfectly." Her voice was cold. "I was convenient, available, nobody, the perfect disposable wife." Rowan's jaw tightened. "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." "You're angry." "Of course I'm angry. You used me. You married me under false pretenses to maintain a disguise. I'm just a prop in whatever game you're playing." "You're my wife," Rowan said sharply. "That makes you a duchess. It gives you power, protection, resources you never would have had otherwise. How exactly have you been harmed?" Eliza stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I've been lied to, manipulated, dragged away from everything I knew, not that there was much, and dropped into a life I don't understand with a man who clearly sees me as nothing more than a useful tool." She was breathing hard, her carefully maintained composure cracking. Rowan stood too. "If you were just a tool, I would have left you in the city after the wedding. I brought you here because what? Because you needed to make it look real? Because you didn't break." The words hung in the air. Eliza stared at him. "I've seen plenty of people crumble when their world falls apart," Rowan continued, his voice quieter now. "I've watched men with far more resources than you had collapse under pressure. But you stood there in that chapel, humiliated and trapped, and you didn't cry, didn't beg.
You calculated your options and made a choice. That's not nothing. So what? You brought me here to see if I'd entertain you, to see how long I'd last before I broke down? No, I brought you here because I thought you might actually survive this. Eliza's anger faltered. Survive what? Rowan walked around the table, closing the distance between them. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Being married to me isn't safe, he said. The corruption I've uncovered, it involves powerful people, dangerous people. When I expose them, there will be consequences. Retaliation. Anyone close to me becomes a target. Eliza's breath caught. Then why marry at all? Because a duke without a duchess raises questions. Because appearing settled, stable, makes me less of an obvious threat. And because... He paused. Because I thought you deserved better than what you were getting. What I was getting was nothing. Exactly. They stood there, facing each other in the candlelight. Eliza's mind was racing again, but this time, pieces were starting to fit together. You're going to expose them, she said slowly. Everyone you found. You're going to burn it all down. Yes. And when you do, they'll come after you. Probably. After us, Eliza corrected. I'm your wife now. You said it yourself. That makes me a target too. Rowan nodded slowly. Yes. You should have told me. Would it have changed your answer? Eliza thought about it. Thought about that moment in the chapel when she'd had a choice, say yes and step into the unknown, or say no and go back to Victoria's house, to slow suffocation and eventual erasure. No, she admitted, but I still deserve to know. You're right. Rowan took a breath. I'm sorry. The apology surprised her. She hadn't expected it. What happens now? She asked. Now we prepare. I have evidence to compile, cases to build. It'll take time. Weeks, maybe months. And me? What do I do? Whatever you want. This is your home now. You're free to explore it, use its resources, do as you please. I'm a duchess who knows nothing about being a duchess. Then learn. Eliza huffed a laugh. Just like that? Why not? She wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways that was easier said than done. But she was tired. Exhausted, actually. The adrenaline that had been carrying her through the day was fading, leaving her hollow and unsteady. I need to sleep, she said. Rowan nodded. Of course. I'll have someone show you back to your rooms. I can find it. You'll get lost. The house is... I'll figure it out. She turned and walked toward the door. Her hand was on the handle when Rowan spoke again. Eliza. She paused but didn't turn around. You're not a prop, he said quietly, and you're not disposable. I should have made that clear from the start. Eliza's throat tightened. She opened the door and walked out without answering. The hallways were quiet. Most of the servants had retired for the night. Eliza walked slowly, trying to remember the route back to her rooms. She took a wrong turn twice before finally finding the right corridor. When she reached her chambers, she closed the door and leaned against it. Then, finally, she let herself feel it. The fear, the anger, the overwhelming uncertainty of everything that had just happened. She'd been married, taken from her home, brought to a palace, given a title she didn't understand and thrust into a world that didn't make sense. And somewhere in all of that, she'd learned that her new husband was planning to start a war against powerful, dangerous people. A war she was now part of. Eliza walked to the bed and sat down, her legs finally giving out. This morning, she'd been nothing. A girl her stepmother wanted to erase. Tonight, she was a duchess, the wife of one of the most powerful men in the country. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, she had no idea what would happen. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going to disappear. Not anymore. Whatever game Rowan Blackthorne was playing, she was in it now, whether he'd intended it or not. And if she was going to survive, if she was going to do more than just survive, she needed to stop reacting and start acting. She needed to learn, to understand this world she'd been dropped into, to figure out the rules so she could break them when necessary. Victoria had tried to destroy her. Instead, she'd accidentally given Eliza exactly what she needed: a position, resources, and a reason to fight back. Eliza lay back on the impossibly soft bed and stared up at the canopy above her. She was Eliza Blackthorne now, Duchess of Ashenmore, and she was done being underestimated. Eliza woke to unfamiliar silence. Not the kind of quiet that came from being alone. She'd had plenty of that in Victoria's house, locked away in her small room at the back of the second floor where no one had to see her. This was different, heavier, like the silence itself had weight. She opened her eyes to find sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, falling across bedsheets far too fine to be real. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then the memories crashed back. The wedding, the carriage, the revelation, Rowan Blackthorne, Duke of Ashenmore, her husband. Eliza sat up slowly, pushing her hair out of her face. The room looked even more overwhelming in daylight. All that blue silk and polished wood and space, so much space. Her entire bedroom back home could have fit in one corner of this place. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "My lady?" A woman's voice, hesitant. "May I enter?" Eliza pulled the sheets up to her chin. "Yes?" The door opened to reveal a young woman about Eliza's age, maybe a year or two older, carrying a breakfast tray. She had auburn hair pinned back neatly and kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. "Good morning, my lady. I'm Sarah. I've been assigned as your personal maid." She set the tray down on a side table. "I wasn't sure what you'd prefer, so I brought a bit of everything.
Tea, coffee, toast, eggs. Just tea is fine," Eliza interrupted. Her stomach was still tight from last night. Sarah poured a cup with practiced efficiency. "His lordship asked that I inform you he's in his study this morning. He'd like to speak with you when you're ready. No rush, of course." Of course. Because dukes didn't rush. They summoned people when convenient and expected compliance. Eliza accepted the teacup. "Where's the study?" "I can show you, my lady, after you've dressed."
Right. Because she couldn't just wander around in a nightgown, even though technically this was her house now, supposedly. Sarah was already moving toward a wardrobe Eliza hadn't noticed last night. She opened it to reveal several dresses, all in rich fabrics and deep colors. The dressmaker sent these over early this morning, just temporary pieces until she can do a proper fitting. I think this one, she pulled out a dress in charcoal gray with subtle embroidery along the bodice, would suit you nicely. Eliza wanted to ask how the dressmaker had known her size, wanted to ask how any of this had been arranged so quickly, but she already knew the answer. Rowan had planned everything, every detail, days, maybe weeks in advance. She'd been a chess piece moved into position before she even knew the game was being played. "Fine," she said. Sarah helped her dress, which was humiliating because Eliza had been dressing herself for years, but apparently duchesses didn't do that. Sarah's hands were quick and efficient, lacing up the back of the dress without comment about Eliza's too thin frame or the fading bruise on her shoulder from where she'd walked into a doorframe last week. When she was finished, Eliza barely recognized herself in the mirror. The dress fit perfectly. The color made her pale skin look less sallow and more porcelain. Her dark hair, which Sarah had somehow tamed into something resembling elegance, fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She looked like someone important. The illusion was almost convincing. "Beautiful, my lady," Sarah said warmly. Eliza didn't respond. She turned away from the mirror. "Show me to the study." The walk through Ashenmore's corridors was longer than Eliza expected. Sarah led her down the grand staircase, through a hallway lined with more stern-faced portraits, past what looked like a library that made Eliza's heart skip. She'd deal with that later. And finally to a heavy oak door at the end of a quieter wing. Sarah knocked twice. "Enter," came Rowan's voice from inside. Sarah opened the door and stepped aside. Eliza walked in. The study was smaller than the other rooms she'd seen, but it felt more lived in. Books lined 3 walls from floor to ceiling. A massive desk dominated one side, covered in papers and ledgers and what looked like maps. A fire burned low in the hearth. And standing by the window with his back to her was Rowan. He turned when she entered. He looked different in daylight, less like the mysterious figure from last night, and more like what he actually was. A man in his late 20s, maybe 30, with the kind of presence that came from being born into power and knowing exactly how to wield it. "You came," he said. "You summoned." His mouth quirked slightly. "I invited." "Same thing when you're a duke." "Fair point." He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit. Please. Eliza sat, keeping her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap. Every inch the proper Lady Victoria had tried to beat into her. Rowan settled into the chair across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. "Did you sleep?" he asked finally. "Some." "The rooms are adequate?" "They're enormous." "You'll get used to it." Eliza doubted that but didn't argue. "You wanted to speak with me?" "Yes." Rowan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We need to establish some ground rules." "Rules?" Eliza repeated flatly. "Expectations, then. This situation is unusual, for both of us. But we're married now, and that means we need to figure out how this is going to work." "You could have figured that out before you married me." "Probably, but I didn't, so here we are." He didn't sound apologetic, just pragmatic. "First, your freedom. You're not a prisoner here. You can go anywhere on the grounds, use any room, speak to anyone. The library is yours if you want it. So is the music room, the gardens, whatever you need." Eliza's chest tightened at the mention of the library, but she kept her expression neutral. "How generous." "I'm not trying to be generous. I'm trying to be clear. You're the Duchess. This house is as much yours as mine. Except I have no idea how to be a duchess." "Then learn." There it was again. That casual dismissal disguised as advice. "You make it sound simple," Eliza said. "It's not, but you're smart. You'll figure it out." "How would you know if I'm smart? You don't know anything about me." Rowan's gaze sharpened. "I know you kept your composure yesterday when most people would have fallen apart. I know you asked the right questions last night instead of just accepting what you were told. And I know—" He paused. "I know you've been educating yourself in secret. Victoria dismissed your tutors years ago, but you didn't stop learning." Eliza's blood went cold. "How—" "I did my research before I agreed to this arrangement. Your stepmother thinks you're an empty-headed burden. Your father thinks you're a disappointment. But the bookseller 3 streets from your house told me you've been buying technical manuals and law texts for the past 2 years, always paid in cash." "Always claimed they were for your father." Eliza couldn't breathe. Those books, her one rebellion, her one secret, and he'd known about them the whole time. "You had no right," she said quietly. "You're right. I didn't." Rowan's expression didn't change. "But I needed to know who I was bringing into my house, whether you'd be a liability or an asset." "And which am I?" "I'm still deciding." The honesty was almost insulting. Almost. Eliza stood abruptly. "Is that all?" "No." Rowan stood too. "There's something else. In 2 days we're hosting a dinner, 20 guests. Local nobility, a few business associates, some officials from the northern counties." Eliza's stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because a duke who just got married doesn't hide his new wife away. People will talk, they'll wonder, and wondering leads to questions I can't afford right now. So I'm a prop after all." "You're my wife. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." Rowan's jaw tightened. "This isn't optional, Eliza. You need to attend, you need to look the part, and you need to convince them that this marriage is real." "It is real. We signed the papers." "You know what I mean." She did. He meant she needed to pretend, to smile and nod and act like the happy new bride who'd married for love, instead of being bartered off like livestock. "I don't know how to do that," Eliza admitted. The words tasted bitter. "Then we practice." "Practice what? Lying?" "Playing a role." Rowan moved closer. "You've done it before. With Victoria. With your father. You've spent years pretending to be less than you are. This is just a different performance." He wasn't wrong, but that didn't make it easier. "What if I mess up?" Eliza asked. "What if I say something wrong or use the wrong fork or—" "Then we improvise, together." Rowan's voice softened slightly. "You won't be alone in this, Eliza. I'll be right there." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he'd actually support her instead of just throwing her to the wolves and watching to see if she survived. But trust was expensive, and she'd already been burned too many times. "Fine," she said. "I'll do it. But I need help." "What kind of help?" "I need to learn how to be a duchess. Fast. I need someone to teach me the rules, the expectations, how to talk to these people without sounding like an idiot." Rowan nodded slowly. I'll arrange it. Hastings can help with protocol. And there's someone else, a woman named Margaret, who served my mother before she died. She knows everything about running a noble household. When can I meet her? Today, if you want. I want. Something that might have been approval flickered across Rowan's face. Good. I'll send for her. He moved toward the desk, already shifting his attention to the papers scattered across its surface. The conversation was apparently over. Eliza turned to leave, but something stopped her at the door. Rowan? He looked up. Last night you said exposing the corruption would make me a target. How dangerous are we talking? He set down the paper he'd been holding. Honestly, I don't know. Some of the people involved are just opportunists, cowards who will fold the moment they're confronted. But others, he trailed off. Others what? Others have too much to lose, and desperate people do desperate things. Eliza's hands clenched at her sides. You really should have told me this before we got married. Would you have said no? She thought about it, really thought about it. Back in that chapel with Victoria watching and her father looking away, she'd had a choice. Say yes to the unknown or say no and return to slow suffocation. No, she said finally. I still would have said yes, but I would have gone in with my eyes open. Your eyes are open now. Are they? Because I still feel like I'm fumbling in the dark. Rowan crossed the room until he was standing directly in front of her. He was tall. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Listen to me, he said quietly. You're right. I should have been honest from the start. I should have given you more information, more choice. That's on me. But we're here now and we have to deal with what is, not what should have been. Can you do that? Eliza held his gaze. Can you stop treating me like a variable in your equation? I'll try. That's not a yes. It's the best I've got right now. At least he was honest. That counted for something. Fine, Eliza said. I'll try too. Rowan nodded. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. You're tougher than you look, he said. I've had to be. I'm starting to understand that. He stepped back, giving her space. Eliza took it, slipping out the door before the conversation could get any more complicated. Sarah was waiting in the hallway, looking nervous. Is everything all right, my lady? It's fine, Eliza lied. Can you show me to the library? Sarah's face brightened. Of course, right this way. The library was everything Eliza had dreamed of and nothing she'd expected. It was massive, 2 stories tall with a balcony running along the second level, accessible by a wrought iron spiral staircase. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with books in leather bindings. Some looked ancient, their spines cracked and faded. Others were newer, their titles stamped in gold. Eliza walked in slowly, her footsteps muffled by thick carpet. It's beautiful, she breathed. His lordship's grandfather collected most of these, Sarah said, though his lordship has added quite a few himself. You're welcome to read anything you like, of course. Of course. Because this was hers now, supposedly. Eliza moved along the shelves, trailing her fingers across the spines. History, philosophy, mathematics, legal treatises, medical journals, poetry, fiction, everything. She pulled out a volume at random, a thick book on contract law, and flipped it open. The pages were crisp, the text dense and technical, perfect. My lady? Sarah was hovering near the door. Is there anything else you need? Eliza looked up. No, thank you, Sarah. I'll be here for a while. Sarah curtsied and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Alone, Eliza sank into one of the leather chairs by the window and opened the book properly. For the first time since the wedding, she felt like she could breathe. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Margaret arrived that afternoon, a stern woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested she'd been trained by the military. She took one look at Eliza and said, "We have a lot of work to do." She wasn't wrong. They started with the basics, how to walk into a room, how to greet guests based on their rank, which utensils to use and when, how to make conversation without revealing anything important, how to smile just enough to seem warm, but not so much that she looked desperate. It was exhausting. You're too stiff, Margaret said on the second day as Eliza practiced her curtsy for the 100th time. You look like you're at a funeral, not a dinner party. Maybe I am, Eliza muttered.
Margaret's lips twitched. Dramatic. But I suppose that's better than timid. They worked through the afternoon, breaking only when Eliza's legs started shaking from the repetitive movements. Margaret finally called a halt when the sun began to set. Enough for today. You're not perfect, but you won't embarrass yourself. That's as much as we can hope for. High praise, apparently. Eliza collapsed into a chair the moment Margaret left. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. And her head was spinning with rules and protocols and expectations. Sarah appeared with tea and biscuits, bless her. You did wonderfully, my lady, she said encouragingly. I barely survived. That counts as wonderful in this house. Eliza laughed despite herself. She was starting to like Sarah. That evening, Rowan found her in the library again. She'd claimed the same chair by the window and was working her way through a book on property law. Not exactly light reading, but it was helping her understand the legal framework she'd just been dropped into. Still studying? Rowan asked from the doorway. Eliza looked up. Is that a problem? No, just observing. He walked in, carrying a folder thick with papers. I thought you might want to see these. What are they? The evidence I collected. Names, dates, transactions. Everything I found while I was playing beggar. Eliza set down her book. Why show me? Because you asked what you were walking into. This is it. He handed her the folder. Eliza opened it carefully. Inside were pages and pages of meticulous notes, records of bribes paid to inspectors, falsified tax documents, warehouse receipts that didn't match shipping logs. A web of corruption that stretched across dozens of officials and merchants. It was damning, comprehensive, irrefutable. This is incredible, Eliza said quietly. How did you get all this? Carefully. It took weeks of watching, listening, piecing things together. Most of these people got sloppy because they thought no one was paying attention. And now? Now I compile it into formal accusations. Submit them to the king's magistrate. Let the legal system handle it. Eliza looked up sharply. You think the legal system will actually do something? Why wouldn't it? Because half the people on this list probably have friends in high places. They'll lawyer up, call in favors, drag it out until everyone forgets or gets paid off. Rowan's expression darkened. You don't have much faith in justice. I have faith in reality. Eliza tapped the folder. This is good work, but it's not enough. Not if you're going up against people with money and connections. Then what do you suggest? Eliza hesitated. She was about to overstep, way overstep. But she'd started this conversation, and backing down now would just prove she was all talk. You need more than evidence, she said carefully. You need leverage, something personal, something that scares them more than legal consequences. Rowan studied her. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about strategy. These people don't fear the law. They've spent years bending it to their will, but they do fear scandal, ruin, public humiliation. So you want me to threaten them? I want you to win. The words hung between them. Rowan moved closer, his eyes sharp with something that might have been interest. You've thought about this. I've had time. You've had 2 days. I'm a fast learner. He huffed a laugh. Actually laughed. You are, aren't you? Eliza closed the folder and handed it back to him. I'm just saying, if you want to actually dismantle this network instead of just slapping a few wrists, you need to think bigger, deeper. You need to make it personal. And how exactly do I do that? Find their weaknesses, their secrets, the things they're hiding even from their co-conspirators. Eliza stood, warming to the topic despite herself. Everyone has something they're ashamed of, something they'd do anything to protect. You find that, you control them. Rowan was watching her with an intensity that made her suddenly self-conscious. What? She asked. Nothing. Just revising my assessment. Of what? You. He smiled slightly. You're not just smart. You're ruthless. Eliza wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an accusation. I'm practical, she said. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Ruthless people enjoy the cruelty. I just want results. Rowan considered that, then he nodded slowly. All right. Let's say you're right. How would you go about finding these weaknesses? Eliza's mind was already racing. Start with your dinner guests tomorrow. Watch them. Listen to how they interact. Who's nervous? Who's too confident? Who avoids certain topics? You want me to interrogate my own guests? I want you to observe. There's a difference. That smile again. You sound like a strategist. I sound like someone who's been on the receiving end of manipulation for 6 years. I know how it works. The smile faded. Victoria. She's very good at finding pressure points, at making people do what she wants without them even realizing they've been cornered. Eliza's voice hardened. I watched her do it to my father, to our servants, to me. And now you want to use her tactics. I want to survive. If that means learning from my enemies, so be it. Rowan set the folder down on a nearby table. He looked at her, really looked at her, for a long moment. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? Someone broken, or at least bent. Someone who'd be grateful for rescue and wouldn't ask too many questions. Sorry to disappoint. You didn't. You surprised me. That's different. He moved toward the door, then paused. Tomorrow night, he said. The dinner. I want you to do exactly what you just described. Watch. Listen. Tell me what you see. Eliza's heart jumped. You're serious? Completely. You want to be useful? Here's your chance. I thought I was just supposed to smile and look pretty. You can do both. And then he was gone, leaving Eliza alone with a racing pulse and the sudden, terrifying realization that she'd just talked herself into something far more dangerous than learning proper curtsy technique. The night of the dinner arrived too quickly. Eliza stood in her chambers staring at herself in the mirror while Sarah fussed with the final details of her hair. The dress was deep burgundy silk, far fancier than anything she'd ever worn. It fit perfectly, because of course it did, and made her look older, sophisticated, like someone who belonged in a duchess's skin. The illusion was better this time. You look stunning, my lady, Sarah said warmly. Eliza didn't feel stunning. She felt like an imposter. What if I mess this up? She asked quietly. Sarah met her eyes in the mirror. Then you improvise. That's what Her Grace always did. Her Grace? The late Duchess. His Lordship's mother. Sarah's expression softened. She used to say that half of being noble was just pretending you knew what you were doing until it became true. Eliza huffed a weak laugh. Fake it until you make it. Exactly. A knock at the door interrupted them. Hastings appeared, looking impeccable in his formal livery. My lady, the guests are beginning to arrive. His Lordship requests your presence in the receiving hall. This was it. Eliza took a deep breath, smoothed down her skirt, lifted her chin. I'm ready. The walk down to the main floor felt like a march to execution, but Eliza kept her spine straight and her expression calm, just like Margaret had taught her. Rowan was waiting at the bottom of the grand staircase. He was dressed in formal evening wear, all black and crisp lines, and he looked every inch the powerful duke he actually was. He watched her descend, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or approval. You clean up well, he said when she reached him. So do you. He offered his arm. Ready? No. Yes. They walked together into the receiving hall, and Eliza's carefully maintained composure almost cracked. The room was filled with people, easily 20 of them, all dressed in finery that probably cost more than Eliza's entire childhood wardrobe combined. They were clustered in small groups, talking in low voices with glasses of wine in their hands. Every single one of them turned to look when Rowan and Eliza entered. The scrutiny was immediate, invasive. Eliza could feel them assessing her dress, her posture, her worthiness to stand next to a man like Rowan Blackthorne. She wanted to run. Instead, she smiled, small, polite, exactly like Margaret had demonstrated. Rowan's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. A subtle gesture of support. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. Thank you for coming. I'd like to introduce my wife, Eliza Blackthorne, Duchess of Ashenmore. The room erupted in polite applause, and Eliza's real test began. The applause felt like a judgment. Eliza kept her smile fixed in place as faces she didn't recognize nodded politely in her direction. Some looked genuinely curious. Others looked skeptical. A few, mostly the older women clustered near the fireplace, looked downright hostile. She'd expected this. Margaret had warned her. "They'll be waiting for you to fail," she'd said that morning. "Don't give them the satisfaction." Rowan guided her forward, his hand still covering hers on his arm. The warmth of it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Lord and Lady Pemberton," Rowan said smoothly, stopping in front of an older couple. "May I present my wife, Eliza." Lord Pemberton was a portly man with a florid face and thinning hair. His wife was rail-thin and sharp-eyed, dressed in emerald green that made her look vaguely reptilian. "Duchess," Lord Pemberton said, bowing slightly. "What a pleasure. We were so surprised to hear of the Duke's marriage. Quite sudden, wasn't it?" "Love doesn't follow a schedule," Eliza replied. The words came out smoother than she'd expected. Lady Pemberton's eyes narrowed. "How romantic. And where did you two meet, if I may ask?" "In the city," Rowan said before Eliza could answer. "Through mutual acquaintances." It wasn't exactly a lie. Victoria had been the acquaintance, even if she hadn't known what she was doing. "How lovely," Lady Pemberton said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "And your family, my dear? I don't believe I'm familiar with the Harrow line." There it was, the first real test. Eliza felt Rowan tense slightly beside her, but she kept her voice even. "A small family. My father manages some holdings in the city. Nothing as grand as Ashenmore, of course." "Of course." Lady Pemberton's smile was razor thin. "Well, I'm sure you'll adjust to your new position. Eventually." The dismissal was clear. Eliza was beneath them, and they wanted her to know it. Before she could respond, a younger man appeared at Rowan's elbow, late 20s, handsome in a carefully groomed way, with blonde hair and an easy smile. "Rowan, hiding your bride already?" He turned to Eliza with genuine warmth. "Thomas Ashford, at your service. I've known this surly bastard since we were boys." "Language, Thomas," Rowan said, but there was no heat in it. Thomas grinned. "He pretends to be proper, but trust me, Duchess, he's terrible company most of the time. You have my sympathies." Despite herself, Eliza smiled. A real one this time. "I'll manage." "I'm sure you will. Anyone who can tolerate Rowan's obsession with those dusty ledgers deserves a medal." Thomas glanced at Rowan. "Speaking of which, are you actually going to enjoy yourself tonight, or are you going to spend the whole evening interrogating your guests about tax receipts?" "I don't interrogate." "You absolutely do." Eliza filed that away. Thomas was comfortable with Rowan in a way the others weren't. That meant he was either genuinely close or very good at pretending. Either way, he was worth watching. More introductions followed, a blur of names and titles that Eliza tried desperately to remember. Lord Stirling, who owned half the textile mills in the northern counties. Lady Catherine Hartwell, a widow with 3 marriageable daughters, who looked at Rowan like he was a prize that had been unfairly claimed. Sir Richard Bosworth, a magistrate with cold eyes and a handshake that lasted too long. By the time they made it through the receiving line, Eliza's face hurt from smiling. Dinner was announced. Rowan led her to the dining room, another massive space with a table long enough to seat 30 people comfortably. Tonight it held 20, with Rowan at the head and Eliza positioned to his right, the place of honor, the Duchess's seat. Servants moved efficiently, pouring wine and serving the first course. Eliza watched the guests settle in, noting who sat near whom, who spoke freely and who measured their words, who drank heavily and who barely touched their glass. Lord Stirling was already on his 3rd glass of wine, and the soup had just arrived. Lady Hartwell kept glancing at Rowan with poorly concealed longing. Sir Richard was watching everyone with the kind of attention that suggested he was cataloging information for later use. "So, Duchess," Lady Pemberton said from across the table, her voice carrying, "how are you finding Ashenmore? It must be quite an adjustment from wherever you came from." The barb was barely concealed. Eliza set down her spoon carefully. "It's beautiful, though I imagine any home becomes comfortable with time. Of course, though some require more adjustment than others." Lady Pemberton smiled sweetly. "I do hope you've had proper instruction in managing a household of this scale. It can be overwhelming for those unused to it." Translation: "You don't belong here, and everyone knows it." Eliza felt heat rising in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "I'm fortunate to have excellent teachers.
How reassuring. Rowan's hand found Eliza's under the table. A brief squeeze. She squeezed back, grateful for the anchor. The conversation shifted. Politics, trade routes, the upcoming hunting season. Eliza listened more than she spoke, watching the dynamics play out. Lord Sterling dominated most discussions, his voice growing louder with each glass of wine. Sir Richard interjected occasionally with pointed questions that felt like tests. Thomas kept things light with jokes and stories that diffused tension. And through it all, Rowan watched, calm, controlled, revealing nothing. It wasn't until the third course that things got interesting. "I heard the most peculiar rumor last week," Lady Hartwell said, her voice carefully casual. "Something about irregularities in the tax collections from the northern districts. Do you know anything about that, Duke Blackthorne?" The table went quiet. Rowan sipped his wine. "Irregularities? Just talk, I'm sure. You know how people gossip. Something about missing records and officials asking uncomfortable questions." "I haven't heard anything," Rowan said smoothly. "But if there are issues with tax collection, I'm sure the appropriate authorities will investigate." "Of course." Lady Hartwell's smile didn't reach her eyes, though one does wonder where such rumors start. Eliza felt the shift in the room, the sudden tension. Several guests were watching Rowan now, their expressions guarded. They knew something, or suspected something. "Rumors start everywhere," Thomas interjected. "Usually in taverns after too much ale. I wouldn't put much stock in them." "Quite right," Lord Pemberton agreed, though he looked uncomfortable. "No point in spreading baseless gossip." But the damage was done. The topic hung in the air like smoke. Eliza glanced at Rowan. His expression hadn't changed, but she saw the tightness around his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw. He was angry or worried. Maybe both. The dinner continued, but the easy atmosphere had evaporated. Conversations became more stilted, more careful. People started watching what they said. By the time dessert arrived, Eliza had a headache forming behind her eyes. Finally, blessedly, Rowan stood. "Ladies, gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Please, feel free to retire to the drawing room for brandy and cards." The guests rose, filtering out in small groups. Eliza moved to follow, but Rowan caught her arm. "Stay," he said quietly. "I need to speak with you." They waited until the last guest had left. Then Rowan closed the dining room door and turned to face her. "Did you catch it?" he asked. "Catch what?" "Lady Hartwell. That wasn't casual conversation. That was a warning." Eliza thought back to the exchange. The careful wording, the way everyone had reacted. "She knows," Eliza said slowly, "about your investigation. Or suspects, which is almost worse." Rowan ran a hand through his hair, the first crack in his composure all evening. "I've been careful, meticulous. There shouldn't be any way for word to have leaked. Unless someone talked." "Who? The only people who knew were—" He stopped. His expression darkened. "No." "What?" "Wait here." He strode out of the room, leaving Eliza standing alone among the remnants of dinner. She waited, her mind racing through possibilities. If someone had talked, who? A servant? One of Rowan's people from the city? Or someone closer? Rowan returned 10 minutes later with Thomas in tow. Thomas looked confused and slightly worried. "What's this about?" Thomas asked. "Did you tell anyone about my work in the city?" Rowan's voice was flat, dangerous. Thomas's confusion deepened. "Your work? You mean the beggar thing?" "Yes. Of course not. You swore me to secrecy. I'm not an idiot." "Then who—" "Rowan." Thomas's voice turned serious. "What's going on?" Rowan explained briefly. The investigation, the evidence, Lady Hartwell's comment at dinner. Thomas's face paled. "You think there's a leak?" "I think someone knows more than they should. And if they know, they'll move to protect themselves." "Or eliminate the threat," Eliza said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. "She's right," Thomas said after a moment. "If the people you're investigating realize what you're doing, they won't just sit around waiting for you to expose them." "So what do we do?" Rowan asked. Eliza's mind was working furiously. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for without realizing it, the chance to prove she was more than just decoration. We changed tactics, she said. Rowan frowned.
How?
You've been gathering evidence quietly, planning to present it all at once. But if they already suspect you, that strategy won't work. They'll have time to cover their tracks, destroy records, intimidate witnesses. So we move faster, Thomas said. No. Eliza shook her head. We move smarter. We don't wait for them to prepare. We force their hand. Explain, Rowan said. Eliza took a breath. This was either brilliant or insane, possibly both. We make them think you're further along than you are, that you already have enough to bring charges, that the only question is when, not if. And how does that help? Because desperate people make mistakes. If they think they're about to be exposed, they'll panic. They'll reach out to co-conspirators. They'll move money, destroy evidence, maybe even turn on each other to save themselves. And when they do, we'll be watching, Rowan finished. His eyes had sharpened. We track their movements, see who contacts whom, catch them in the act of covering up. Exactly. Thomas let out a low whistle. That's actually clever. Risky as hell, but clever. It's also dangerous, Rowan said, looking at Eliza. If we spook them too much, they might do more than just destroy evidence. They might come after us directly. They might do that anyway, Eliza pointed out. At least this way we're in control. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, thinking it through. Finally he nodded. All right, we do it your way. But we'll need to be strategic about how we spread the word. Make it seem credible without being obvious. Leave that to me, Thomas said. I'm excellent at gossip. Despite everything, Eliza almost smiled. They spent the next hour planning. Thomas would start planting seeds among the guests still gathered in the drawing room. Casual comments about Rowan's project and how it was coming along nicely. Nothing specific, just enough to make people wonder. Meanwhile, Rowan would send carefully worded letters to certain officials requesting meetings to discuss matters of mutual concern. The vagueness would do more to alarm the guilty than any direct accusation. And Eliza would watch, listen, report anything suspicious. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. Thomas left to work his magic among the guests. Rowan and Eliza remained in the dining room, the silence stretching between them. You did well tonight, Rowan said finally. Lady Pemberton thinks I'm a nobody who doesn't belong here. Lady Pemberton is a snob who thinks everyone is beneath her, including me most of the time. That surprised a laugh out of Eliza. Really? She's old nobility. I'm new money, relatively speaking. My grandfather earned his duchy through military service, not inheritance. Some people never let you forget that. I didn't know. Most people don't. Rowan leaned against the table. The point is, you held your ground. That's not easy when you're being actively dismissed. I wanted to throw my wine in her face. That would have been memorable, but not diplomatic. No, he smiled slightly, though I would have enjoyed seeing it. Eliza found herself smiling back. For a moment, the weight of the evening lifted. Then Rowan's expression turned serious again. About what you said earlier, the plan. Are you sure you want to be involved in this? It's one thing to sit through a dinner party. It's another to actively participate in what's essentially a counterintelligence operation. I'm already involved, Eliza said. I became involved the moment you married me. You could stay out of it, stay safe. Could I? You said it yourself. Being your wife makes me a target, so I might as well be a useful target. Rowan studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Hastings appeared at the door. My lord, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a matter that requires your immediate attention. Rowan straightened. What kind of matter? A messenger arrived from the city. He's quite insistent on speaking with you. Says it's urgent. Something cold settled in Eliza's stomach. Messages that arrived at night were never good news. I'll be right there, Rowan said. Hastings bowed and withdrew. Rowan turned to Eliza. Go back to the guests. Smile. Chat. Act like everything is normal. What if it's not? Then we deal with it, but not in front of them. He was already moving toward the door. Eliza followed, her heart pounding. In the entrance hall, a young man stood waiting. He was mud-splattered and breathing hard, like he'd ridden fast and far. When he saw Rowan, he bowed quickly. Your Grace, I'm sorry to come at this hour, but Lord Ashford said you'd want to know immediately. Eliza's confusion must have shown, because Rowan explained quickly, I have people in the city. They send reports. The messenger pulled a sealed letter from his coat and handed it over. Rowan broke the seal and read. His face went pale. What? Eliza asked. Some.
What is it? Rowan looked up, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. There was a fire tonight, at one of the warehouses I was investigating, the one with the falsified shipping records. A fire, Eliza repeated. You mean, I mean someone burned it to the ground, along with all the evidence inside. The implications crashed down on her. Someone had made a move fast before Rowan could act. They know, she whispered.
They know, Rowan confirmed grimly. He turned to the messenger. Casualties? 3 dead, sir. Warehouse workers who were inside when it started. They didn't get out in time. Eliza felt sick. 3 people, dead, because of this. Get him food and a bed, Rowan told Hastings. Then to the messenger. Rest tonight. I'll have a response ready by morning. The messenger bowed and followed Hastings out. Rowan stood motionless, staring at the letter in his hands.
This is my fault, he said quietly. I waited too long. I should have moved faster. You couldn't have known. I should have. His voice was harsh. I knew these people were dangerous. I knew they had resources. And I still thought I could take my time, build the perfect case. Now 3 people are dead because I hesitated. Eliza wanted to comfort him, but didn't know how. She barely knew him. What do we do now? She asked. Rowan's jaw set. Now we stop playing it safe. He turned and headed back toward the drawing room. Eliza hurried to keep up. What are you going to do? What you suggested. Force their hand, but bigger, faster. Rowan. He pushed open the doors to the drawing room. The guests looked up, surprised by the abrupt entrance. Rowan's presence filled the space immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I have an announcement to make. The room went silent. Some of you may have heard rumors about my recent activities in the city, about investigations into certain irregularities in tax collection and trade practices. Eliza saw several faces go pale. Lord Sterling set down his drink. Sir Richard sat up straighter. I want to address these rumors directly, Rowan continued, his voice carrying. They're true. For the past 3 months, I've been conducting a comprehensive investigation into corruption within the Northern Territories, and I found evidence of systematic fraud involving multiple officials and merchants. The room erupted. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. You can't just accuse... Rowan held up a hand. The room quieted, though the tension was electric. I'm not making accusations tonight, but I am giving notice. Within the week, I will be submitting formal charges to the King's Magistrate. Those involved will have the opportunity to come forward voluntarily. Those who don't, he let the threat hang. Eliza's heart was hammering. He was really doing it, burning every bridge, forcing every hand. Lady Hartwell stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You can't just... I can, Rowan interrupted. And I am. She stared at him for a moment, then gathered her skirts and swept toward the door. I won't stay here and be insulted. Several other guests stood as well, clearly intending to follow. Feel free to leave, Rowan said calmly. But know that leaving now won't look good when the investigations begin. That stopped some of them, but not all. Within minutes, half the guests had departed, leaving behind muttered excuses and barely concealed fury. Thomas appeared at Rowan's elbow. Well, that was subtle. Subtlety wasn't working. You just declared war on half the nobility in the northern counties. I know. Eliza moved closer, her voice low. They're going to come after you now. Hard. Rowan looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not fear but determination, cold and absolute. Let them try. The remaining guests filtered out over the next hour, most of them looking shell-shocked. By midnight, the house was quiet again. Eliza found Rowan in his study, surrounded by papers and maps. He looked exhausted. You should sleep, she said from the doorway. Can't. Too much to do. Rowan, 3 people died tonight, Eliza. His voice was raw. Because I wasn't fast enough. I can't sleep knowing that.
She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. You can't save everyone. I could have saved them. Maybe. Or maybe they would have died anyway and you'd be dead too. You don't know. He slumped back in his chair. I keep thinking, what if I'd just gone to the magistrate immediately? What if I'd trusted the system instead of trying to build an ironclad case? Then they would have buried it. You know that. Eliza moved closer. The system is broken. That's why you had to investigate in the first place. And now it's even more broken, because now they know someone's coming for them. Good. Let them know. Let them panic and make mistakes. Rowan looked up at her. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, Eliza admitted. But being afraid doesn't change what needs to happen. He stood, crossing to the window. Outside, the grounds were dark and still. I should send you away, he said quietly. Somewhere safe, before this gets worse.
No. Eliza, no, she repeated firmly. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I'm your wife and I'm staying. You don't understand what you're agreeing to. Then explain it to me. Stop treating me like I'm fragile and tell me the truth. Rowan turned to face her. The truth is that the people I'm going after, they have armies, private forces, money, influence, and they will use all of it to stop me. That means raids, attacks, possibly assassination attempts. On you, on both of us. Eliza's mouth went dry, but she held his gaze. Then we'll have to be careful. Careful might not be enough. It'll have to be. They stood there, the weight of what they were facing settling between them. Finally, Rowan spoke. I need to ask you something. What? Why are you doing this? Really? You barely know me. You owe me nothing. You could walk away right now, annul the marriage, go back to what? Eliza interrupted. To Victoria? To a house where I'm invisible? To a life where I don't matter? She shook her head. No. I'd rather fight and lose than go back to that. Even if fighting might kill you? Yes. The answer came without hesitation, and as she said it, Eliza realized it was true. She'd rather die trying to matter than live safely as nothing. Rowan studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was tired and grim, but real. You're going to be trouble, aren't you? Probably. Good. He moved back to his desk. Then help me. Look at these maps. Tell me if you see any patterns. Eliza joined him, leaning over the papers spread across the desk. Maps of the Northern Territories, trade routes marked in ink, warehouse locations circled in red. What am I looking for? She asked. Connections. The people I'm investigating, they're working together, but I haven't figured out how they're coordinating. There has to be a hub, a central location where they meet or communicate. Eliza traced her finger along the trade routes. Most of them converged on 3 major cities, North Haven, Millbrook, and there, she said, pointing to a smaller town on the map, Greystone. Rowan frowned. Why Greystone? It's tiny. Exactly. Look, all these routes pass through it, but it's not marked as a hub on any official records. It's too small to be significant, which makes it perfect for meeting without drawing attention. Rowan studied the map, his expression shifting from skepticism to dawning realization. You're right, He grabbed another set of papers. Half the people on my list have property or business interests near Greystone. I thought it was coincidence. It's not. He looked at her with something like wonder. How did you see that? I've been reading your notes for 3 days, and I'm good with patterns. Plus, Rowan laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. I knew marrying you was a good idea. Before Eliza could respond, the window shattered. Glass exploded inward. Rowan grabbed Eliza and pulled her down behind the desk as something heavy hit the wall where they'd been standing. Stay down, he ordered. Eliza's ears were ringing. She looked up and saw an arrow embedded in the wall, still quivering. An arrow. Someone had just tried to kill them. Rowan was already moving, pulling her toward the door. We need to get out of this room, now. They'd barely made it to the hallway when they heard shouting from downstairs, the sound of breaking glass. Footsteps. Too many footsteps. Someone was in the house. Rowan pushed Eliza behind him, his hand going to his belt where a knife was sheathed. Stay close to me. They moved quickly down the corridor.
Behind them, Eliza heard more crashes, voices barking orders. Whoever this was, they weren't alone. They reached the main staircase. Below, in the entrance hall, she could see shadows moving. At least 4 men, maybe more, dressed in dark clothes and carrying weapons. "The servants' stairs," Rowan whispered. "This way." He led her to a narrow door hidden in the wall paneling. Inside was a steep, cramped staircase that led down to the lower floors. They descended in darkness, Rowan's hand gripping hers tightly. At the bottom was a door that opened into the kitchens. Empty now, the fires banked for the night. "We need to get to the stables," Rowan said. "Get horses. Get out." "What about the servants? Hastings? Sarah?" "They know how to hide. They'll be safe." They'd almost made it to the back door when a figure stepped out of the shadows. Sir Richard Bosworth, the magistrate from dinner. He was holding a pistol. "Going somewhere, Your Grace?" he asked pleasantly. Rowan went very still. "Richard, I didn't expect you to be personally involved." "Clearly. You were always too trusting, Rowan. Made you easy to manipulate. You were feeding them information. For years. Why do you think the corruption ran so deep? Someone had to make sure the right people looked the other way." Richard's smile was cold. "You should have left well enough alone. People died tonight because of you. Unfortunate, but necessary. Just like this is necessary." He raised the pistol, aiming directly at Rowan's chest. Eliza didn't think. She grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy iron pan hanging from a hook, and threw it. Her aim was terrible. The pan sailed past Richard's head by a full foot, but it startled him. His shot went wide, the bullet embedding itself in the doorframe. Rowan lunged forward, tackling Richard to the ground. The pistol skittered across the floor. Eliza scrambled for it, her hand shaking so badly she almost couldn't grip it. Behind her, Rowan and Richard were fighting. Brutal, efficient, no wasted movement. Rowan was faster, but Richard was desperate. Eliza raised the pistol with both hands, trying to aim, but they were moving too much. She couldn't get a clear shot. Then Richard pulled a knife from his boot and drove it toward Rowan's ribs. Rowan caught his wrist, but the blade was inches from his skin. "Stop," Eliza shouted. Her voice cracked. "Stop, or I'll shoot." Both men froze. Richard looked at her, calculating. "You won't. You don't have it in you. Try me." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Richard smiled. "You're bluffing." He twisted the knife, trying to break Rowan's grip. Eliza pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. The recoil knocked her back a step. Richard collapsed, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. Rowan kicked the knife away and stood, breathing hard. He looked at Eliza, his eyes wide. "Are you all right?" he asked. Eliza stared at the pistol in her hands. She'd just shot someone, actually shot them. "I think so," she whispered. "You saved my life." "He was going to kill you." "Yes, he was." Footsteps thundered above them. The intruders were getting closer. Rowan grabbed her hand. "We have to move. Now." They ran for the back door, leaving Richard bleeding on the kitchen floor. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. They could hear shouting from the front of the house. More men. More danger. The stables were across the courtyard, barely visible in the darkness. They were halfway there when torches appeared behind them. 5 men. 6. All armed. "There!" someone shouted. Rowan pulled Eliza faster. They reached the stables and he grabbed the nearest horse, a massive black stallion that stamped nervously. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Not well." "Good enough." He lifted her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her, grabbing the reins. The horse bolted forward just as the first arrow whistled past Eliza's head. They crashed through the stable doors and out into the open. Behind them, men were mounting horses, giving chase. Rowan urged the stallion faster, heading for the tree line at the edge of the property. Eliza clung to the horse's mane, the wind tearing at her hair and dress. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst. They plunged into the forest. Branches whipped at them. The horse stumbled on the uneven ground but recovered. Behind them, she could hear the pursuers. Getting closer. "Hold on," Rowan said in her ear. He veered sharply left, then right, navigating through the trees with the kind of precision that suggested he'd done this before. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit faded. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes before Rowan finally slowed the horse. They were deep in the forest now. No lights. No sounds except the horse's breathing and the wind in the trees. Rowan dismounted and helped Eliza down. Her legs almost gave out. "We need to keep moving," he said, "but the horse needs rest." Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked, leading the horse between them. After a while, Rowan spoke. "You shot him." "I know." "Have you ever fired a gun before?" "No." "You could have missed, could have hit me." "I know that too." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "Why did you do it?" Eliza met his eyes. "Because he was going to kill you, and I couldn't let that happen." "Why not?" "Because—" She stopped. Why? Why had she risked everything for a man she barely knew? Because somewhere in the past 3 days, Rowan Blackthorne had stopped being just a stranger who'd married her for convenience. He'd become the first person in years who'd treated her like she mattered. "Because you're my husband," she said finally, "and I protect what's mine." Something shifted in Rowan's expression. He reached out and touched her face, his hand gentle. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then he kissed her. It was brief, chaste, but it felt like a promise. When he pulled back, Eliza was trembling. "We need to keep moving," Rowan said. "We're not safe yet." "Where are we going?" "Greystone." Eliza's eyes widened. "The hub? You want to go straight to— They've declared war. Burned my warehouse, attacked my home, tried to kill us both." His voice was hard. "I'm done playing defense. We're taking the fight to them." "That's insane." "Probably. We could die." "Also probable." Eliza looked at him, this man who'd accidentally given her a reason to live. Who'd made her feel powerful for the first time in her life. "All right," she said. "Let's go to war." Rowan smiled. It was fierce and dangerous and completely genuine. "I knew marrying you was the right choice." They mounted the horse again and rode deeper into the night, toward Greystone and whatever waited for them there. Behind them, Ashenmoor burned. The smoke from Ashenmoor still hung in the air miles behind them, a dark smudge against the pre-dawn sky. Eliza could smell it on her clothes, taste it at the back of her throat. Her dress was torn, muddy, streaked with blood that wasn't hers. Her hands were blistered from gripping the horse's mane. Every muscle in her body screamed. She'd never felt more alive. Rowan hadn't spoken in over an hour. He sat rigid behind her, one arm wrapped around her waist to keep her steady, the other controlling the reins. The horse had slowed to a walk. They'd pushed it too hard for too long, and even Rowan's urgency couldn't override the animal's exhaustion. When the first light of dawn began filtering through the trees, Rowan finally pulled the horse to a stop. "We need to rest," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Just for an hour. The horse won't make it otherwise." Eliza slid down, her legs buckling the moment her feet hit the ground. She caught herself against a tree, breathing hard. Rowan dismounted more smoothly, though she could see the strain in his movements. He led the horse to a small stream and let it drink. Eliza sank down onto a fallen log, suddenly aware of just how cold she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading, leaving her shaking and nauseous. "Here!" Rowan appeared beside her, draping his coat over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm and smelled like smoke and leather. "You need it more than I do," Eliza protested weakly. "I'm fine, you're in shock." Was she? Eliza looked down at her hands. They were trembling. She'd shot a man, actually pulled the trigger and watched him fall. The memory felt distant and surreal, like it had happened to someone else. "I killed him," she whispered. "You shot him in the shoulder. He'll live." "Unfortunately." "How do you know?" "Because you hesitated. Aimed low instead of center mass. A trained killer wouldn't have done that." Eliza wasn't sure if that was comfort or criticism. I didn't want to." "I know." Rowan sat down beside her. "But you did it anyway, because you had to." "Does it get easier?" "No." The blunt honesty was somehow better than false reassurance. Eliza pulled his coat tighter around herself. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We get to Greystone, find proof of what they're doing there, and we burn their entire operation to the ground." "With what army?" "We're 2 people, on 1 horse, with no supplies, no weapons. We have the most dangerous weapon there is. Rowan's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The truth. And the willingness to use it. That's not going to stop bullets. Maybe not, but it'll stop them from hiding. He stood, offering her his hand. Come on, we're not safe here. They rode for another 3 hours, sticking to back roads and forest paths that Rowan seemed to know by instinct. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Eliza dozed against Rowan's chest, her body demanding rest even as her mind refused to quiet. When she woke, they were approaching a town. Greystone was smaller than Eliza expected, barely more than a village, really. A cluster of stone buildings arranged around a central square. A few shops. An inn. A church with a crooked steeple. The kind of place that looked sleepy and insignificant, perfect for hiding illegal activity. We can't just ride in like this, Eliza said. We look like refugees. We are refugees. You know what I mean? We need to blend in, figure out what's happening before we make a move. Rowan considered this. You're right. We'll leave the horse outside town. Walk in separately. Meet at the inn. Why separately? Because if they're watching for us, they'll be looking for a duke and duchess together, not two random travelers. It made sense, but Eliza's stomach twisted at the thought of being alone in enemy territory. Rowan must have seen her fear because his arm tightened around her waist. You can do this. I've seen you handle worse. When? Last night. You faced down an armed magistrate and won. I got lucky. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. You were prepared. You stayed calm. You made a choice. He paused. You saved my life. The weight of that settled between them. Eliza had saved him, and in doing so, she'd proven something, to him, to herself. That she wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore. She was a player in this game. They left the horse in a copse of trees half a mile from town, hidden from the main road. Rowan gave Eliza what little money he had in his pockets. Not much, but enough for a room and a meal. Go to the inn. Tell them you're a traveling companion to a merchant who got delayed. You're waiting for him to catch up. Order food. Listen to conversations. See if anyone mentions Ashenmore or recent arrivals. And you? I'm going to find the local magistrate's office. See what records they keep. That's dangerous. So is breathing at this point. Rowan touched her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Be careful. You too. He kissed her forehead, quick and gentle, then turned and walked toward town without looking back. Eliza waited a few minutes, then followed. The inn was called the Broken Wheel, which didn't inspire confidence. But inside it was clean enough. Rough wooden tables, a fireplace throwing heat, the smell of bread and stew. A handful of locals sat scattered around, eating breakfast and talking in low voices. Eliza approached the counter where a heavy-set woman was wiping down mugs. Room for the night? Eliza asked, trying to sound tired and ordinary. The woman looked her up and down, taking in the muddy dress and disheveled hair. Rough journey? Cart broke down. I'm waiting for my employer to arrange repairs. Merchants always finding trouble on these roads. The woman pulled out a ledger. 2 silver for the room. Meals extra. Eliza counted out the coins, hyper-aware of how few remained. Breakfast? Please. The woman gestured to an empty table. Sit. I'll bring it out. Eliza chose a spot where she could see both the door and the rest of the room, her back to the wall, just like Rowan always positioned himself. She was learning. The stew arrived, thick and hot, and better than she'd expected. Eliza ate slowly, listening. Heard there was trouble up at the Duke's estate. Her attention sharpened. 2 men at a nearby table were talking in voices just loud enough to carry. Both looked like laborers, rough clothes, calloused hands. What kind of trouble? The second man asked. Fire, I heard. Maybe bandits. Lord Sterling's man came through this morning, asking questions. Lord Sterling, one of Rowan's dinner guests, one of the names on his corruption list. He say what he was looking for? Some fugitives. A man and a woman said they were dangerous, offering a reward for information. Eliza's blood went cold. They were already looking, already spreading lies. How much of a reward? Didn't say, but Sterling doesn't throw money around for nothing. Must be serious. The conversation shifted to other topics. Eliza forced herself to keep eating, to look unconcerned, but her mind was racing. They were being hunted, actively. And if Sterling had men here, that meant Greystone was definitely important. She needed to find Rowan, warn him. But she'd barely stood up when the door opened and 3 men walked in, well-dressed, armed, moving with the kind of purpose that said they weren't here for lunch. Eliza sat back down, her heart hammering. The men approached the innkeeper. "We're looking for 2 people, a man and a woman. Probably arrived this morning. Would have looked disheveled, like they'd been traveling rough." The innkeeper's eyes flicked toward Eliza. "No, please, no." "Haven't seen anyone like that," the woman said. "Just my regulars and this young lady waiting for her employer." One of the men turned to look at Eliza. She kept her expression neutral, bored even, though her pulse was screaming. "You," he said, "stand up." Eliza obeyed slowly. "Is there a problem?" "Where are you from?" "Millbrook. I work for a textile merchant. Our cart broke down yesterday. I'm waiting while he arranges repairs." "Millbrook?" The man's eyes narrowed. "That's 2 days' journey. You've been traveling alone?" "With the merchant. He stayed with the cart." "What's his name?" Eliza's mind went blank. Then, desperately, she grabbed a name from the guest list at Rowan's dinner. "Thomas Ashford." The man's expression shifted. "The Lord's son? Traveling as a textile merchant?" She'd made a mistake, a stupid, fatal mistake. "Not him," Eliza said quickly. "Just a man with the same name, common enough." But the damage was done. The man was suspicious now, moving closer. "Show me your hands." Eliza held them out, palms up. The blisters from riding were visible. Fresh, obvious. "Those aren't cart riding blisters," the man said. "Those are from horseback, long distance." He grabbed her wrist. Eliza yanked back, but he was stronger. "I think you'd better come with us." "I haven't done anything wrong." "Then you won't mind answering a few questions at the magistrate's office." He was pulling her toward the door. Eliza looked around desperately. The other patrons were watching but not intervening. The innkeeper looked away. They were in the doorway when a voice rang out. "Let her go!" Everyone turned. Rowan stood in the middle of the street, disheveled and filthy but radiating authority. He'd dropped any pretense of hiding. "Duke Blackthorne," the man holding Eliza said, his voice tight. "Lord Sterling will be very interested to know you're here." "I'm sure he will. But first, let go of my wife." The man hesitated. Then he smiled. "I don't think so. See, Lord Sterling said you'd probably try something stupid, said to use any leverage necessary." He drew a knife and pressed it to Eliza's throat. She went very still. The blade was cold against her skin. "You're going to come with us quietly," the man said to Rowan, "or I open her throat right here." Rowan's expression didn't change, but Eliza saw his hands clench. "If you hurt her," Rowan said quietly, "I will end you. Not quickly, not cleanly. I will make you beg for death and deny it. Do you understand?" The man's smile faltered. "Big talk for someone without, Rowan moved. Eliza didn't even see him draw the knife. One moment he was standing 10 feet away. The next he'd crossed the distance and his blade was buried in the man's wrist. The man screamed. His knife clattered to the ground. Rowan pulled Eliza away and shoved her behind him. The other 2 men drew their weapons. Rowan faced them, unarmed now except for the knife he'd just used. "Walk away," Rowan said. "Tell Sterling I'm here. Tell him I'm done hiding. Tell him if he wants me, he can come himself instead of sending lackeys." "He'll kill you," one of them said. "He can try." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the wounded man stumbled toward his companions, clutching his bleeding wrist. "Fall back. Get reinforcements." They retreated, but slowly, making it clear they'd be back. The moment they were gone, Rowan turned to Eliza. "Are you hurt?" "No. Are you insane? You just gave away our position." They already knew we were here. Better to control the narrative. By challenging them to an open fight? By showing them we're not running anymore. Rowan looked at the gathered crowd, locals who'd watched the whole thing. "Spread the word. Duke Rowan Blackthorne is in Greystone, and I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." One of the men in the crowd stepped forward. He was old, weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. "Your Grace," he said carefully, Is it true? What they're saying about Lord Sterling and the others? About the corruption? Rowan met his eyes. Yes, I have proof, documented evidence of fraud, bribery, and worse, involving officials and merchants across the Northern Territories.
A murmur ran through the crowd. Then why hasn't anyone done anything? A woman asked. We've known something was wrong for years. Taxes too high, inspections too frequent, but no one would listen. Because the people profiting from it are the same ones who control the system, Eliza said. All eyes turned to her.
They've made it impossible to fight them through official channels. So we're fighting them another way. We? The old man asked. My wife and I, Rowan said. He reached out and took Eliza's hand. Together. The old man studied them for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. What do you need? What followed was the strangest negotiation of Eliza's life. The old man's name was Thomas, different Thomas, Eliza noted with grim humor, and he'd lived in Greystone for 60 years. He knew everyone, everything, and he was tired of watching his town be used as a pawn. Within an hour, he'd gathered a dozen locals in the back room of the Broken Wheel. Farmers, shopkeepers, a blacksmith, a widow who ran the general store. Ordinary people who'd been squeezed dry by corrupt officials and had finally had enough. They use the old mill, Thomas was saying, pointing to a map someone had sketched on butcher paper. North edge of town, been abandoned for years officially, but there's always people coming and going, fancy carriages, late-night meetings. What kind of meetings? Rowan asked. Don't know for certain, but papers change hands. Money, too. And sometimes goods that don't appear on any manifest. Smuggling. Maybe blackmail material, definitely illegal. We need to get inside, Eliza said. See what they're actually doing. That's suicide, the blacksmith said. They've got guards, armed ones. How many? 4 usually. More when there's a meeting scheduled. Rowan looked at Eliza. Is there a meeting scheduled? Thomas nodded grimly. Tonight, big one. All the major players are supposed to be there. Sterling, Bosworth, if he can travel, 6 others. Perfect, Rowan said. Perfect? The blacksmith repeated. Are you mad? That's when they'll be most heavily guarded. It's also when we'll have the best chance of catching them all together, with evidence. Rowan stood pacing. If we can get in during the meeting, document what they're doing, maybe even get testimony. They'll kill you first, Thomas interrupted, soon as they see you. Not if they don't see us. Everyone looked at Eliza. She'd been thinking, turning the problem over in her mind the way she used to work through logic puzzles in her books. We don't need to get inside, she said slowly. We need them to confess. On record. In front of witnesses they can't intimidate or silence. How? Rowan asked. Eliza's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. They think they're safe in that mill, that no one's watching. But what if we bring the watchers to them? What if we turn their secret meeting into a very public trial? Understanding dawned on Rowan's face. The king's magistrate. Not just the magistrate, everyone. The church, the press, every authority and witness we can find. We surround that mill, and we don't let anyone leave until they've answered for what they've done. That's, Thomas started. Brilliant, Rowan finished. That's brilliant. The blacksmith shook his head. Even if we could get the magistrate here in time, even if we could gather enough people, these men have private armies. They'll fight their way out. Not if the cost is too high, Eliza said. Right now, they're hiding behind legitimacy, behind their titles and their respectability. But if we expose them publicly, in front of the king's representative and half the county, fighting back becomes an admission of guilt. They'll have to surrender or lose everything. She's right, the widow said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. They've spent decades building their reputations. Their power relies on people believing they're legitimate. If that breaks, everything breaks, Rowan finished. Thomas was nodding slowly. I can get word to the magistrate in North Haven. He's honest, one of the few. I can rally the church, the widow offered. Father Benedict has been looking for a reason to stand up to Sterling for years. One by one, the others volunteered. Spread the word, gather witnesses, make sure the whole town knew what was happening. By the time they finished planning, it was mid-afternoon. Rowan pulled Eliza aside while the others dispersed to their tasks.
This is going to be dangerous, he said quietly. Everything's been dangerous. I mean it, Eliza. If this goes wrong, then we'll improvise, like we've been doing. He smiled, but it was strained. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, but I'm also angry. And anger is a better fuel than fear. Rowan pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. When did you get so brave? When I realized I had something worth fighting for. What's that? The chance to matter. The chance to prove I'm more than what Victoria tried to make me. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. The chance to stand next to you and know I earned it. Something raw and honest flickered across Rowan's face. You did earn it. The moment you pulled that trigger last night. Maybe even before that. When? When you stood in that chapel and said yes instead of running. When you looked at me across the dinner table and told me how to win. When you refused to be sent away, even though staying might kill you. He touched her face. You've been earning it from the beginning. I was just too stupid to see it. Eliza's throat tightened. We should prepare. There's a lot to do before tonight. There is. But first, he kissed her. Properly this time. Not the brief touch from last night, but something deeper, more desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When they broke apart, Eliza was breathless. What was that for? She asked. In case we don't survive tonight, I wanted you to know. He stopped. Started again. This started as a convenience, a strategy, but it's not anymore. You're not anymore. What am I? Mine, if you'll have me. Eliza's heart was hammering for entirely different reasons now. I shot a man for you. I think that settles the question. Rowan laughed, surprised and genuine. Fair point. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Rowan coordinated with Thomas and the others, planning positions and timing. Eliza worked with the widow to draft a formal complaint to be presented to the magistrate, documenting every piece of evidence they had. As the sun began to set, word came back. The magistrate was on his way. So was Father Benedict with a contingent from the church, and half the town had agreed to show up at the mill, bearing witness. They're really doing it, Eliza said, watching from the window as people began to gather in the square. They're standing up. You gave them permission, Rowan said, by standing up yourself. We gave them permission together. The mill sat on the northern edge of Greystone, exactly where Thomas had indicated. It was old, stone walls covered in moss, a water wheel that hadn't turned in years. But light showed through gaps in the shutters, and 4 armed men stood guard at the entrance. Rowan and Eliza watched from a distance as carriages arrived. Lord Sterling, looking agitated. 2 men Eliza didn't recognize. A woman in expensive furs who moved with the confidence of someone used to wielding power. That's Lady Pemberton, Rowan murmured. Didn't expect her to be directly involved. Her husband? Dead drunk at home, probably. She's the one with the brains. More arrivals. Within an hour, a dozen people had entered the mill, all of them wealthy, all of them powerful, all of them about to lose everything. Thomas appeared beside them. Magistrates in position. He's brought 6 constables with him. The church delegation is ready, and we've got about 50 townspeople waiting for your signal. 50. Against a dozen corrupt nobles and their guards. But the townspeople weren't armed with swords. They were armed with the truth and witnesses. Wait for my signal, Rowan said. When I give it, bring everyone forward. Surround the building. Make sure no one can leave without being seen. Thomas nodded and melted back into the darkness. Eliza looked at Rowan. What's the signal? You'll know it when you hear it. He started toward the mill. Eliza grabbed his arm. What are you doing? Knocking on the door? That's insane. Probably. But it'll get their attention. Before she could argue, he was walking toward the entrance, bold, unafraid, every inch the Duke he was born to be. The guards saw him coming. They raised their weapons. Tell Lord Sterling that Duke Blackthorn is here, Rowan said calmly. And I'm not leaving until we talk. One guard disappeared inside. The others kept their weapons trained on Rowan. Eliza's heart was in her throat. This was it. The moment everything either worked or fell apart. The door opened. Lord Sterling appeared, flanked by 2 more guards. Rowan, he said. There was no friendliness in his voice now. You should have stayed dead. Sorry to disappoint. You won't be sorry long. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?
I have evidence of systematic corruption involving everyone in that building, including you. I know about the bribes, the falsified records, the smuggling operation you're running through Greystone, and I'm not the only one who knows." Sterling's face darkened. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Rowan raised his hand. From the darkness, people emerged. Dozens of them, carrying torches, surrounding the mill in a wide circle of light. And at the front, wearing the formal robes of his office, stood the king's magistrate. Sterling's face went white. "What is this?" "Justice," Rowan said. "You've spent years hiding in the shadows, Sterling. Congratulations. You're in the light now." The magistrate stepped forward. "Lord Sterling, I'm here to investigate allegations of corruption and fraud against you and several others. I have a warrant to search these premises and detain anyone found inside for questioning." "This is outrageous. You can't just—" "I can, and I am." The magistrate gestured to his constables. "Secure the building." What happened next was chaos. Sterling shouted for his guards to stop them. The guards hesitated, caught between loyalty and the very visible presence of legal authority. Inside the mill, someone started shouting. Lady Pemberton appeared at the door looking furious. "This is an illegal assembly," she snapped. "You have no authority here." "I have the king's authority," the magistrate replied, "and 50 witnesses. Are you really going to fight this in front of all of them?" Lady Pemberton's eyes swept the crowd. Ordinary people. Townspeople who knew her face. Who would remember this? Her shoulders stiffened. "This is a private meeting. We've done nothing wrong." "Then you won't mind if we verify that." The constables moved forward. The guards looked at Sterling, at Pemberton, at the crowd of witnesses. Slowly they lowered their weapons. The constables entered the mill. Rowan followed. Eliza was right behind him. Inside was exactly what they'd hoped for. Tables covered in ledgers, boxes of documents, and in the center of the room, a safe, currently open, filled with cash. "Well," Rowan said quietly, "this looks like nothing wrong." The magistrate began examining the documents. His expression grew darker with each page. "These are falsified tax records," he said. "And these are contracts for goods that don't exist. This is fraud, systematic, organized fraud." "You can't prove those are ours," Sterling said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I can prove you're all here, in a room full of illegal documents and unexplained cash, at a secret meeting." The magistrate looked at him coldly. "That's enough to start." One by one, the people in the room began to realize they'd lost. Sir Richard was there, his arm in a sling from the gunshot wound. He looked at Eliza with pure hatred. Lady Pemberton's mask of composure was cracking. Others Eliza didn't recognize looked between the constables and the windows, calculating whether they could run. "Take them into custody," the magistrate ordered. "All of them. We'll sort out who's guilty of what later." The constables moved to comply. Some of the accused went quietly. Others protested loudly. Sterling tried to argue about protocol and procedure until the magistrate silenced him with a look. Eliza watched it all, feeling strangely detached. They'd done it. Actually done it. Rowan appeared beside her. "You all right?" "I think so. Is it over?" "This part is. The trials will take months, but yes, we won." From outside came the sound of cheering, the townspeople celebrating, justice, real justice, finally being served. Father Benedict appeared in the doorway, beaming. "Duke Blackthorne, Duchess. The town wants to thank you." They stepped outside to find the crowd had grown. People from neighboring farms and villages had heard what was happening and come to witness it, to be part of it. Thomas pushed through to the front. "Your Graces, on behalf of Greystone, thank you for seeing us, for listening, for giving us a chance to fight back." "You did the fighting," Rowan said. "We just gave you the opening. You gave us more than that. You gave us hope." Others echoed the sentiment. Stories poured out of extortion, of impossible taxes, of inspections that were really just shakedowns, years of suffering that had finally found a voice. Eliza felt tears pricking her eyes. These people, they'd been invisible too, just like her, crushed under systems designed to exploit them. And now they were visible, heard, powerful. "We should address them," Rowan murmured. You should, Eliza said. We should, together. He took her hand and led her to the front of the crowd. The torchlight made everyone look almost ethereal, like something out of a dream. People of Greystone, Rowan said, his voice carrying. What happened tonight was just the beginning. This corruption, it runs deep. Deeper than one town, one region, but you've proven something important. You've proven that ordinary people standing together can challenge power, can demand better, can win. The crowd cheered. This fight isn't over, Rowan continued. There will be trials, investigations. Some of the people we arrested tonight will try to wriggle free, but they'll have to do it in the light now, where everyone can see. More cheers. Rowan turned to Eliza, nodded. Her turn. Eliza's mouth went dry. She'd never spoken to a crowd before, never had anything worth saying, but these people were looking at her with hope, with trust. She couldn't let them down. I'm not from here, she said. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. A week ago, I was nobody. A girl my stepmother wanted to erase. She married me to a stranger and sent me away, thinking that was the end of my story. The crowd had gone quiet, listening. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because that stranger, my husband, he saw something in me I'd stopped seeing in myself. He gave me a chance to matter, to fight, to stand up instead of staying silent. She looked at Rowan. He was watching her with something like awe. That's what we're offering you, Eliza continued, turning back to the crowd. A chance to matter, to fight for the life you deserve instead of accepting the one you've been given. It won't be easy, it won't be safe, but it will be yours. The cheering was deafening. Eliza stepped back, her heart pounding. Rowan pulled her close. You're incredible, he said in her ear. I'm terrified. Same thing. The celebration continued late into the night. The magistrate and his constables secured the mill and began the long process of cataloging evidence. The townspeople shared food and stories. Children ran through the square, laughing. Eliza watched it all from the steps of the broken wheel, exhausted but unable to sleep. Rowan found her there as the first light of dawn began to color the sky. We should head back to Ashenmoor, he said. See what's left. Start rebuilding. And then we keep fighting. This was one battle, Eliza. There's a war ahead. I know. He sat beside her. They watched the sunrise together, neither speaking. Finally, Eliza said, I shot a man, faced down a knife, gave a speech to a crowd of strangers. A week ago, I couldn't even argue with my stepmother without apologizing. You've changed. So have you. When I first met you, you were hiding, playing a role. Now I'm standing in daylight with you. Achum. He turned to face her. I meant what I said last night. This isn't a strategy anymore. You're not a prop. You're yours, Eliza finished. I know. I heard you. And? She met his eyes. And you're mine. So we'd better not get each other killed. Rowan laughed. Actually laughed. Free and genuine. Deal, he said. They stood together, ready to face whatever came next. Behind them, Greystone was waking, a town that had been silent for too long, finding its voice. Ahead of them lay Ashenmoor, damaged but not destroyed, waiting to be reclaimed. And everywhere, in cities and villages across the Northern Territories, people were starting to hear about what happened in Greystone, about a duke and duchess who'd refused to back down, who'd stood with ordinary people against the powerful. The story was spreading. And stories, Eliza was learning, could be more powerful than any weapon. The stories spread faster than Eliza had anticipated. Within days, word of what happened in Greystone had reached every corner of the Northern Territories. Within weeks, it had spread to the capital. A duke who'd disguised himself as a beggar to expose corruption. A duchess who'd stood with ordinary people against the powerful. A town that had refused to stay silent. The kingdom was listening. The journey back to Ashenmoor took 3 days. Rowan had bought horses and supplies in Greystone, paid for with donations from grateful townspeople who'd insisted on helping. Eliza had tried to refuse, but Thomas had been firm. You gave us our dignity back, he'd said. Least we can do is make sure you don't starve on the road. So they'd ridden home with full saddlebags and something that felt dangerously like hope. The first sight of Ashenmoor made Eliza's chest tighten. The main house still stood, but barely.
The east wing was gutted by fire, the windows blown out, the roof collapsed. Smoke stains blackened the stone walls. The courtyard was littered with debris. The gardens were trampled. It looked like a war zone, because it had been. Rowan sat motionless on his horse, staring at the damage. His face was unreadable, but Eliza saw the tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckle grip on the reins. "It can be rebuilt," she said quietly. "Can it?" His voice was hollow. "My family built this house over 3 generations, and I destroyed it in one night." "You didn't destroy it, they did. The people who attacked us. Because of choices I made." Eliza guided her horse closer, reaching out to touch his arm. "Because of choices they made. You exposed their crimes. They chose violence. That's on them, not you." Rowan finally looked at her. "You don't blame me." "For what? Fighting back? Standing up?" "No, I don't blame you." She paused. "Do you blame yourself?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly. "Yes, but I'm working on it." They dismounted and walked toward the house. As they got closer, Eliza heard voices. Movement. People were inside. Rowan's hand went to his knife. Eliza tensed. Then Hastings appeared in the doorway, looking disheveled but alive. His formal composure cracked when he saw them. "Your Grace! Your Grace!" He practically ran down the steps. We thought you were dead. When the house was attacked, we saw you flee, but then there was no word." "We're alive, Hastings." Rowan gripped the older man's shoulder. "Are you all right? The other servants?" "All safe. We hid in the cellars and the old tunnels. A few injuries, but nothing serious." Hastings' expression turned grim. "Though the house took significant damage. The attackers were thorough." "How many were there?" "At least 20. Maybe more. They ransacked your study, the library, every room they could find, looking for something." "Evidence," Rowan said. "They wanted to destroy anything I might have compiled." "They didn't find it," a new voice said. Sarah appeared behind Hastings, holding a leather satchel. She looked tired and soot-stained, but she was smiling. "My lady," she said, curtsying to Eliza. "We saved what we could. Your books, His Grace's papers, most of the important documents." Eliza stared at her. "You stayed during the attack?" "We hid them first, then we hid ourselves." Sarah held out the satchel. "Everything you'll need for the trials." Rowan took the satchel with something like reverence. "Sarah, you could have been killed." "So could you, but you weren't running, so neither were we." She glanced at Eliza. "The Duchess taught us that. Standing up is better than staying silent." Eliza's throat tightened. She'd given one speech. One. And somehow it had mattered. Over the next few hours, the full extent of the damage became clear. The East Wing would need to be completely rebuilt. The library had water damage from the fire brigade's efforts to contain the flames. Half the furniture was destroyed. The gardens were ruined, but the house still stood. The staff was alive, and the evidence was safe. "We'll rebuild," Rowan said that evening as they surveyed the wreckage of his study. "Stronger than before." "That's going to take time. And money. We have both. And we have something more valuable. Momentum." He turned to face her. "The arrests in Greystone are just the beginning, Eliza. The magistrate found enough evidence to implicate 24 officials across the Northern Territories. The king himself has ordered a full investigation." "That's good news." "It's complicated news. Some of the people implicated have powerful friends. They're going to fight back legally this time. Challenge the evidence, question the arrests, drag everything through the courts for years if they can." Eliza understood. "They'll try to bury it in bureaucracy." "Exactly. Unless we give them a reason not to." "What kind of reason?" Rowan pulled out a chair, one of the few that had survived intact, and sat down. "Public pressure. If enough people are watching, demanding justice. The courts won't be able to quietly make this disappear, but we need to keep the story alive. Keep people engaged." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I think you might." Eliza blinked. "Me?" "You're the one who figured out how to turn a secret investigation into a public confrontation. You're the one who gave that speech in Greystone that has half the territory talking. People listen to you, Eliza. They trust you in a way they don't trust me. That's because you're a duke.
People expect dukes to play political games. And what do they expect from duchesses? Eliza had to think about that. What had people expected from her, from Victoria, from the other noble women she'd observed at the dinner party? Silence, decoration, obedience. They expect us to be quiet, she said slowly, to support our husbands and manage households and stay out of important matters. Exactly. So when you stand up and speak and fight, it means something. It challenges their assumptions. Eliza sank into the chair across from him. You want me to keep speaking, keep challenging. I want you to do whatever you think is right. But yes, I think your voice is more powerful than you realize. His faith in her was almost overwhelming. A week ago, she'd been nobody. Now he was suggesting she had the power to influence public opinion across an entire kingdom. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt right. All right, Eliza said. Then I need to learn, properly. I can read law books and study theory, but that's not enough. I need to understand how the legal system actually works. How to write briefs and file motions and argue cases. Rowan's eyebrows rose. You want to study law? Is that a problem? No, it's just women don't usually... I know what women don't usually do. I'm asking if I can do it anyway. A slow smile spread across Rowan's face. You can do anything you want. You're a duchess. If anyone objects, remind them you helped bring down the most extensive corruption network in recent history. That tends to shut people up. Over the following weeks, Ashenmore transformed. Reconstruction crews arrived to repair the fire damage. Craftsmen rebuilt walls and replaced windows. The staff worked tirelessly to restore order. Slowly, room by room, the house came back to life. And while the physical structure healed, Eliza began her education. Rowan arranged for a retired magistrate from Northaven to tutor her, a sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor Graves who'd spent 40 years navigating the legal system and had no patience for incompetence. Law isn't about fairness, Eleanor said on their first day. It's about precision. You use the exact right words in the exact right order to make the system do what you want. Miss one technicality and your case falls apart. Then teach me the technicalities. Eleanor's severe expression softened slightly. Most nobles want easy answers. You're asking for the hard work. I can respect that. They met every morning in the partially restored library. Eleanor brought cases and precedents. Eliza read until her eyes burned, taking notes in the margins, asking questions that sometimes made Eleanor smile and sometimes made her scowl. You're thinking like an advocate, not a scholar, Eleanor said one afternoon. That's good. Scholars memorize. Advocates strategize. Is there a difference? In this profession, everything. The trials began in late autumn. The capital assembled a special tribunal to handle the corruption cases. 5 judges, all appointed directly by the king. The proceedings were public, held in the great hall of the royal courthouse. Hundreds of people attended, packing the galleries to witness justice being served. Eliza and Rowan attended every session. Lord Stirling was tried first. He stood before the tribunal looking diminished, his formerly confident demeanor replaced by barely concealed panic. His lawyers argued procedural errors, questioned the legitimacy of the evidence, tried every trick to get the case dismissed. But the evidence was overwhelming. Ledgers showing bribes, testimony from merchants who'd been extorted, documents proving systematic fraud. The lead prosecutor presented it all methodically, piece by piece, building an unassailable case. Eliza watched from the gallery, studying the tactics. The way the prosecutor used silence after making a point, the way he anticipated objections and addressed them preemptively, the careful orchestration of evidence to tell a story. This was what Eleanor had been teaching her. Law as strategy, as performance. On the 3rd day, the judges delivered their verdict. Lord Stirling, this tribunal finds you guilty of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to defraud the crown. You are hereby stripped of your title and lands. Your assets are forfeit to the crown. You will serve 20 years imprisonment. The gallery erupted. Stirling collapsed. His lawyers scrambled to file appeals that everyone knew would fail. One down. Lady Pemberton's trial was next. She handled it better than Stirling, cool and composed, answering questions with practiced deflection. But the evidence didn't care about composure. Guilty. 15 years. Title and lands forfeit. Sir Richard Bosworth tried to flee before his trial. He was caught at the border and dragged back in chains. His trial lasted less than a day. Guilty. Life imprisonment for attempted murder in addition to corruption charges. One by one, the corrupt officials fell. Some pleaded guilty and received lighter sentences. Others fought until the bitter end and lost anyway. By winter, the Northern Territories had been scrubbed clean. New officials were appointed. New systems were put in place. Reforms that Rowan and the magistrate had drafted together became law. And through it all, people watched. Ordinary people who saw that the system could work, that justice was possible. The stories kept spreading, but not everyone was celebrating. Eliza was working in the library one afternoon when Hastings announced a visitor. "Lady Victoria Harrow," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "She's requesting an audience." Eliza's blood went cold. "Victoria." "Here. Should I tell her you're not receiving?" Hastings asked. Every instinct screamed yes. Send her away. Don't engage. But Eliza had faced down armed guards and corrupt magistrates. She could face her stepmother. "Show her in," Eliza said, "and stay close, just in case." Hastings nodded and withdrew. Victoria entered a few minutes later, and Eliza had to suppress a shock of satisfaction. Her stepmother looked diminished. The confidence that had always radiated from her like armor was cracked. She wore expensive clothes, but they hung slightly wrong, like she'd lost weight and hadn't replaced her wardrobe yet. "Eliza," Victoria said. Her voice was carefully controlled. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm surprised you came. I'm surprised you agreed to receive me." Victoria's eyes swept the library, taking in the restored shelves and the desk covered in legal texts. "You've done well for yourself."
"No thanks to you." "No. No thanks to me." Victoria took a breath. "That's actually why I'm here. To apologize." Eliza laughed, sharp and bitter. "You're apologizing? You who spent 6 years making my life miserable? Who married me off to a stranger to get rid of me? You're sorry?" "I am." Victoria moved closer. "I won't pretend I didn't know what I was doing. I wanted you gone. Out of my house. Out of my life. You reminded me too much of your mother, and I couldn't stand it. So you tried to destroy me." "Yes. And instead I gave you exactly what you needed to rise above me." Victoria's smile was thin and bitter. "The irony isn't lost on me." Eliza studied her stepmother. She looked tired, defeated. The power she'd wielded so casually was gone. "What happened?" Eliza asked. "Why are you really here?" Victoria's mask cracked slightly. "Your father is dead." The words hit like a physical blow. Edward Harrow, dead. Eliza waited for grief to come. But all she felt was a distant, hollow ache. The man who'd stood by while Victoria destroyed her, who'd chosen weakness over protecting his daughter. "How?" she asked. "His heart gave out 2 weeks ago. The doctor said it was sudden." Victoria's voice was flat. "But I think he'd been dying slowly for years. Ever since your mother passed. He made his choices." "Yes, and so did I." Victoria pulled an envelope from her bag. "He left you this. I found it among his papers."
"It's dated 3 years ago." Eliza took the envelope with trembling hands, her father's handwriting on the outside. Her name in ink that had faded slightly, with time. She broke the seal and read. The letter was short. An apology that came too late. An admission that he'd failed her. A plea for forgiveness he didn't deserve and knew he wouldn't receive. At the end, a single line. "You deserved better than what I gave you. I hope you find it." Eliza folded the letter carefully and set it aside. "He knew," she said quietly. "He knew what you were doing to me, and he let it happen anyway." "He was weak," Victoria said, "and I exploited that weakness. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Eliza. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know what you've accomplished, what you've become. It's extraordinary, and it terrifies me." "Good." Victoria actually smiled. "You're stronger than I ever was. Stronger than your mother, even. And I made the mistake of trying to crush that strength instead of respecting it." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because society is wondering what the Duchess of Ashenmore will do about her father's estate. It's modest, but it's yours now, along with all the debts and the reputation I destroyed." Victoria met her eyes. I'm offering to disappear. Sign over everything to you cleanly. Step out of your life completely. All I ask is enough to live on somewhere quiet. It was a surrender, complete and unconditional. Eliza could refuse, could make Victoria's life as miserable as Victoria had made hers, could use her new power to crush the woman who'd tried to crush her. But what would that prove? That she'd learned cruelty from a master? Take what you need, Eliza said finally. The rest goes to charity. Set up a fund for women with nowhere else to go. Women trapped in situations they can't escape. Give them what I found, a way out. Victoria stared at her. You're serious? Completely. That's generous. It's strategic. Those women will remember who helped them, and someday, when they have power of their own, they might return the favor. Eliza stood. But you're right about one thing. You need to disappear. I don't want to see you again. Victoria nodded slowly. Understood. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I'm glad he was wrong. Who? Your father. In that letter. He hoped you'd find better. Victoria's smile was sad. You didn't find it. You became it. Then she was gone. Eliza sank back into her chair, her hands shaking. She hadn't expected that confrontation, hadn't expected Victoria's surrender or her father's posthumous apology, and she certainly hadn't expected to feel nothing but tired relief. Rowan found her there an hour later, still staring at the letter. Hastings said Victoria was here, he said carefully. Are you all right? My father is dead. Rowan sat down beside her. I'm sorry. Are you? He was weak and cowardly, and he let Victoria destroy me without lifting a finger. He was also your father. You're allowed to mourn him. Eliza looked at the letter. He apologized. 3 years too late, but he tried. Does it help? I don't know, maybe. A little. She set the letter aside. Victoria offered to disappear. I told her to take what she needs and go. You could have made her suffer. I could have, but I'm not her, and I don't want to be. Eliza looked at Rowan. I want to be someone who uses power to build instead of destroy. Is that naive? It's idealistic, but idealism backed by competence is called vision. He took her hand. You'll make mistakes. So will I. But as long as we're trying to do better, we might actually succeed. We already have. Look around, Eliza. Look at what we've accomplished in just a few months. She did look. At the library they'd restored. At the legal text she was studying. At the evidence of change spreading across the Northern Territories and beyond. They'd started something bigger than either of them had anticipated. What happens now? Eliza asked. Now we keep going. The trials will continue for months. The reforms need to be implemented. And there are already whispers that corruption in the Northern Territories wasn't isolated, that it exists in other regions too. You want to investigate them too? I want to create a system where investigations aren't necessary, where corruption is too risky and too visible to survive. Rowan's expression turned thoughtful. But that requires more than just law enforcement. It requires changing how people think about power and accountability. Education, Eliza said, and access. If people understand their rights, they can demand them. Exactly, which is why he pulled a document from his jacket. I had this drawn up. I wanted your input before making it official. Eliza took the paper and read. It was a proposal to establish a legal advocacy program, training for ordinary people in basic law and their rights, sponsored by the Duchy of Ashenmore, to be overseen by the Duchess herself. You want me to run this, Eliza said. I want you to build it, design it, make it something that actually helps people instead of just looking good on paper. Rowan, this is massive. Do we even have the resources? We will. Sterling's forfeited assets are being redistributed. I put in a request for a portion to fund public programs. The king approved it. Eliza's mind was already racing. Curriculum design, finding instructors, determining which communities needed help most. The logistics were staggering and exciting. I'll need Eleanor's help, she said, and probably a staff. And we'll need to pilot the program somewhere first before scaling it up. So that's a yes? Eliza looked up at him. Yes, absolutely yes. Rowan's smile was bright and genuine. I knew you'd say that. How? Because you're you, and you can't resist a challenge. He was right. She couldn't. The legal advocacy program launched in spring. They started small, a single classroom in Greystone teaching basic contract law and rights to anyone who wanted to learn. Eleanor led the first class. 20 people attended the first session. 40 came to the second. By the fourth week, they had to move to a larger space. Word spread. Other towns requested programs. Eliza worked with Eleanor to train additional instructors. They developed written materials, simple guides to common legal issues, written in plain language instead of legalese. You're making law accessible, Eleanor said one day, reviewing the latest curriculum. The legal establishment won't like that. Good, Eliza replied. Let them be uncomfortable. By summer, the program was running in 8 towns across the Northern Territories. Hundreds of people had received training. Several had successfully represented themselves in minor disputes. A few had even gone on to pursue formal legal education. The impact was undeniable, and people noticed. Eliza received letters from merchants who'd used the training to challenge unfair contracts, from farmers who'd fought back against corrupt inspectors, from women who'd escaped abusive marriages because they understood their legal options. Each letter reinforced what she'd suspected from the beginning. Knowledge was power, and power, properly distributed, changed everything. 1 year after the wedding, Ashenmore hosted another dinner party. This time, the guest list was different. Magistrate Eleanor Graves, Thomas from Greystone and his delegation, representatives from the towns where the advocacy program was operating, a journalist from the capital who'd been covering the corruption trials, and Thomas Ashford, who'd remained one of Rowan's closest allies throughout everything. The house had been fully restored, better than before, actually. The new East Wing featured a dedicated library and classroom space for the advocacy program's headquarters. Eliza stood in the receiving hall wearing a dress that actually fit, her hair styled by Sarah, feeling almost comfortable in her own skin. Ready? Rowan asked, offering his arm. Ready. They entered together. The response was immediate and warm. Applause. Genuine smiles. People who were there because they wanted to be, not because protocol demanded it. Thomas from Greystone approached first, beaming. Your Graces, the town sent these as thanks. He handed over a beautifully bound book, testimonials, from everyone whose lives have changed because of what you started. Eliza opened the book carefully. Page after page of handwritten stories. Gratitude. Hope. Change. Her throat tightened. This is too much, she managed. It's not enough, Thomas replied, but it's what we have to give. Dinner was loud and cheerful. Conversations ranged from legal theory to farming practices to the latest political gossip from the capital. Eleanor and Thomas Ashford got into a spirited debate about judicial reform that made half the table laugh and the other half take notes. At the head of the table, Rowan caught Eliza's eye and smiled. This was what they'd built. Not just a program or a legal victory, but a community, a network of people committed to making things better. After dinner, as guests mingled in the drawing room, the journalist approached Eliza. Duchess, might I have a moment? I'm writing a piece about the advocacy program for the capital's evening paper. I'd love to include your perspective. Of course. They stepped aside and the journalist pulled out a notebook. The program is being called revolutionary by some, dangerous by others. How do you respond? Eliza considered the question carefully. I think anything that challenges power structures will be called dangerous by those who benefit from the status quo. But I'd rather be dangerous than complicit. The journalist scribbled notes. Your critics say you're overstepping your role as Duchess. That legal education should be left to professionals. My critics said I should stay silent while my stepmother destroyed me. My critics said women have no place in law. My critics have been wrong about me from the beginning. Eliza's voice was steady. I'm not overstepping. I'm stepping up. There's a difference. What would you say to other women in similar situations? Trapped? Powerless? Eliza thought about the girl she'd been a year ago. Standing in that chapel, being married off to a stranger, convinced her life was over. I'd say your situation doesn't define you. Your response to it does. You might not be able to change your circumstances immediately, but you can change how you think about them. How you prepare for the moment when opportunity finally comes. She paused. And when it does come, grab it. Even if you're terrified, especially if you're terrified, because that fear means it matters. The journalist looked up from his notes. That's quite a statement. It's the truth. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, Eliza and Rowan stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. The moon was full, casting silver light across the restored grounds. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Eliza asked. If Victoria had chosen someone else. If you'd picked a different wife. All the time, Rowan admitted. But I don't regret how it turned out. Even with the attacks, the fire, almost getting killed. Even with that. Because look what we built. He gestured toward the house, the grounds, the towns beyond. A year ago, I was investigating corruption alone. Now there's a system, a movement, people standing up in places we've never even visited. Because of a story. Because of the truth, which you helped me see. Rowan turned to face her. I married you thinking I needed a prop, someone to make my disguise believable. Instead, I got a partner, an equal, someone who's better at this than I am. That's not true. It is. You see things I miss, connect with people in ways I can't, and you have something I've never had, the ability to make people believe change is possible. He touched her face. You make me believe it. Eliza's eyes were burning. I was supposed to disappear. That's what Victoria wanted, what my father allowed. I was supposed to be erased. But you weren't. No, I rewrote the rules. I made them answer to me. You did. And you're still doing it. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the night. What's next? Rowan asked eventually. Eliza thought about the letters she'd been receiving, the requests for programs in other regions, the whispers that corruption existed beyond the Northern Territories, the endless work still to be done. We expand, she said, the advocacy program, the investigations, everything. We don't stop until the system works for everyone, not just the powerful. That's ambitious. So was exposing an entire corruption network. We did that. We almost died doing that. Almost doesn't count. Eliza smiled. Besides, we're better prepared now. Smarter, more connected. More dangerous. Exactly. Rowan laughed. I love you. The words hung in the air between them. Eliza's breath caught. He'd said it so casually, like it was obvious, like it had been true all along, and he was just now getting around to mentioning it. You love me, she repeated. Yes, I thought that was clear. You've never said it. I've shown it, every day. But if you need the words, he pulled her close. I love you, Eliza Blackthorne. I love your stubbornness and your brilliance and the way you refuse to accept limitations. I love that you shot a man to save my life. I love that you're going to change the world, whether the world is ready or not. Eliza's heart was racing. I love you too. Even though you're controlling and secretive and terrible at asking for help. I'm working on that. Work harder. He kissed her, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they broke apart, Eliza was breathless. We should go inside, Rowan said. It's cold. In a minute. She wanted to stand here a little longer, to savor this moment, this feeling. A year ago, she'd been nobody, a girl the world tried to erase. Now she was the Duchess of Ashenmore, a legal reformer, a voice for the voiceless, a woman who'd looked at an impossible situation and refused to accept it. She'd been meant to disappear. Instead, she'd become impossible to ignore. And this was just the beginning. There were more fights ahead, more battles to win, more systems to challenge and people to help and changes to make. But tonight she could just be Eliza. Standing with the man she loved, looking out over the life they'd built together from the ashes of destruction. All right, she said finally. Let's go in. They walked inside together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. Behind them, Ashenmore stood strong, a symbol of resilience, of refusal to be broken. And somewhere in towns and villages across the kingdom, people were reading about the Duchess who'd started as nobody and ended up changing everything. The stories were still spreading, and Eliza Blackthorne was just getting started.